Chapter 662. When the news of Gao Qinguang's death came, Wuxia and his companions, who had changed their appearances, were on a long journey. Clad in the most common sackcloth of Diyu, Wuxia and his companions exercised escape arts and headed toward Zhong province. Accompanying Wuxia and his companions were Yan Dan, and the other emperors and ministers of Great Yan. As for Ying Zheng and the other emperors and ministers of the 5 dynasties, they had gone to other places to develop their territories according to the terms of the treaty. According to the treaty, the future strategies of the 6 dynasties would be different, so that there would not be any conflict of interest. In just half a month, when Wuxia and his companions were still 2.5 months away from Zhong province, the news of Gao Qinguang's death had spread across the entire Diyu. Even the secretive itinerant cultivators whom Wuxia and his companions occasionally met in the wilderness began to discuss the impact of Gao Qinguang's death on the imperial court of Diyu. There were even some immortals and itinerant cultivators from Myriad Immortal Alliance who were cursing the bastard who killed Gao Qinguang hysterically. The Gaochen clan was the descendant of the great Emperor Gaochen of the ancient celestial court. The great Emperor Gaochen joined the celestial court as a human, and ruled over all the demons under the heaven. He was the strongest figure among the 5 celestial emperors of the celestial court at that time. He had gone through several calamities of heaven and earth, until a terrible calamity destroyed more than half of the celestial court. In order to protect the legacy of the celestial court, the great Emperor Gaochen used a forbidden art to resolve the calamity, but in the end, he himself was turned into ashes. Because of the great Emperor Gaochen, the Gaochen clan had a very good relationship with the celestial court. Those immortals who were saved by the great Emperor Gaochen had now occupied a high position in the celestial court. In the dynasty of Diyu, the members of the Gaochen clan, who had inherited the bloodline of the great Emperor Gaochen, were born with the ability to communicate with ghosts and deities, and rule over all the demons under the heaven. In the Directorate of Celestials of Diyu, they were a very important power, and even the Yu clan in Liangzhu could not compare to them. Gao Qinguang was not only the left minister of Diyu's Directorate of Celestials, but also the teacher of the current human emperor of Diyu when he was the crown prince. He was also the teacher of the few most powerful princes in Diyu. His cultivation base was profound, and he had a wide circle of friends. In Great Yu, he was a famous minister and powerful minister. Gao Qinguang's daughter was married to the current human emperor, and the current crown prince of Great Yu was Gao Qinguang's grandson. As an important minister of Diyu, Gao Qinguang had secretly left Liangzhu after Myriad Immortal Alliance had stirred up the chaos in the 4 regions of Diyu, and from time to time, he would eliminate powerful figures from the alliance. In just over a year, nearly 100 gold immortals had been killed by him, and the number of heaven immortals and ordinary cultivators was incalculable. However, with Gao Qinguang's identity and status, it would be extremely embarrassing if news of him dealing with these juniors were to spread out. Therefore, Gao Qinguang's movements were very secretive. Every time he struck, he would leave immediately after, and once he succeeded, he would flee hundreds of millions of miles away. Even the Directorate of Celestials of Diyu did not know that their left minister, the father-in-law of the current human emperor, and the current clan leader of the Gaochen clan, had secretly left Liangzhu to join the war. Worst of all, in order to hide his tracks, Gao Qinguang did not use the supreme tower that he had been refining with his blood and sweat. Instead, he secretly took out a spare supreme tower from the storeroom of the Directorate of Celestials. The supreme tower was a magical item tailor-made for the supreme oracle of Diyu, and was equivalent to a primordial immortal item of a primordial immortal. It was a powerful weapon. Every single brick in the Supreme Tower was refined by the Supreme Oracles with their own blood essence, and every rune was carved with the blood of their own hearts. Therefore, they could synchronize with each other, and enhance the combat ability of the Supreme Oracles by dozens of times. It was a giant weapon that could be used both offensively and defensively. As this spare Supreme Tower had not been refined by Gao Qinguang, apart from the most basic function of breaking through the void as a means of transportation, it had almost zero offensive and defensive functions. However, given Gao Qinguang's formidable strength, he did not fight the elders of the Divine Hall head-on. Instead, he stealthily killed the peripheral members of the Myriad Immortal Alliance. He did not need to use the other functions of the Tower of Babel. No one expected that Gao Guang would encounter a freak like Wuxia. Instead of transcending the lightning tribulation after making a breakthrough, he hid the aura of the breakthrough in his body, and when he encountered a strong enemy, he would suddenly release the aura and attract the heavenly tribulation to attack the enemy. Which ordinary immortal would dare to do such a thing? When breaking through a realm, they would release the aura as soon as possible, so that they could attract the heavenly tribulation and transcend it as soon as possible. If they hid the aura in their body and accidentally leaked it when they were cultivating in the future, the heavenly tribulation would come when they could not move at all. Wouldn't that be courting death? It was tantamount to living with a ticking time bomb, and no ordinary immortal would dare to do such a thing. However, Gao Guang had encountered top-notch immortals like Wuxia and Ao Buzan. The heavenly tribulation came one after another, attracting the innate yin-yang division godly thunder, which struck down randomly and smashed the unprepared Gao Guang into a pulp. Gao Guang dragged his broken body and fled back to Liangzhu City. He didn't even have the time to say his last words, and he didn't even have the chance to take a last glance at his clansmen. He died on the wasteland outside Liangzhu City, with his pair of legs popping out. Wu Qi and the rest hurried back to Zhongzhou. Along the way, they encountered itinerant cultivators and immortals discussing this matter. They heard Gao Guang's background, where he died, and the various disturbances caused after his death. Wu Qi and the rest could not help but twitch their lips. Was it their bad luck, or was it Gao Guang's luck? He was such an important minister, such an extravagant man. Instead of enjoying his life in Liangzhu, he had to wander around and hit people behind their backs. With Gao Guang's death, the human emperor was furious, and Yu had mobilized the whole nation. Countless soldiers who had returned to the countryside had put on their armor again and joined the war. It was true that Myriad Immortal Alliance had encountered a great trouble, but it was bound to become much more difficult for the people of the six dynasties to develop their own power. Originally, Yu had reserved a lot of power, but with Gao Guang's death, it was likely that Yu would go all out to kill the cultivators and immortals on Penghu continent. They could only hope that Ing Zheng and the others would not be too unlucky to be discovered by the enraged army of Yu. They did not want to be killed by Yu's army as soon as they arrived on Penghu continent, thinking that they were the vassals of Myriad Immortal Alliance. Because of the war between Yu and Myriad Immortal Alliance, cultivators and immortals could not use the official teleportation formations of Yu. Therefore, Yin Dan and the others could not let Princess Zhonglu be kept in her interstitial world, as that would be too disrespectful to Yin Dan and the others. Therefore, Wu Qi and the others could only rely on their own escape arts to travel to Zhongzhou. Dian Immortal Pass was a long way from Zhongzhou, and even with Wu Qi's speed, it would take him 3 months to get there. As for Yin Dan and the others, their speed was not as fast as Wu Qi and Princess Zhonglu. It would probably take them a longer time to get there. Along the way, they had witnessed dozens of battles where the Great Yu army encircled and annihilated immortals and itinerant cultivators. Every time, it was Wu Qi who protected them, allowing them to observe the fighting techniques of the Great Yu army up close. Yu Yi, Fan Yuqi, and the other military officers were dismissive of the Great Yu army's command and mobilization. They only felt that the Great Yu army's marching and fighting were extremely rigid. There was no strategy in the battles between the two sides, and it was a head-on fight. After witnessing the battles of the Great Yu army, and learning about Yu's administration along the way, Yin Dan and the others were full of confidence that Great Yin could gain a foothold on Penghu continent. In their opinion, the administration of Yu was like a sieve, with countless loopholes that they could use at will. With the shrewdness and sophistication of Yin Dan and the others, they could do whatever they wanted in a country without a household registration management system or a strict monitoring system. Especially now that Yu and Myriad Immortal Alliance were in a mess, it was perfectly normal for some provinces to have more or less people. Apart from Wu Qi's concern about Gao Guang's death, Yin Dan and the others had become ambitious. They were only waiting to arrive at Zhong province, where they could quickly use Anlu County and Ani County as the base, supplemented by Wu Qi's EC County, to quickly expand their territory and invade Penghu continent. But when they were only half a month away from Zhong province, even Jing Ku, who was the most forthright and careless among them, began to notice that something was not right. The frequency of the Great Yu Army's sightings was getting higher and higher. Previously, they could only see one army of DU every 2 or 3 days, but now they could see 3 to 5 armies of DU flying across the sky in flying ships every day. Originally, strategic forces of DU like the Supreme Oracles rarely appeared in front of people, but now, there was a Supreme Tower shattering the void and appearing in all directions. After carefully scanning the surroundings with their powerful divine sense, they would suddenly shatter the void and go somewhere else. At the peak, Wuxia and the others saw 7 different Supreme Towers appearing in the distant sky in one day. With the power of the sky-reaching tower that could shatter the void, the Supreme Priests didn't need to rest at all. They could go wherever they wanted. With 3 to 5 Supreme Oracles, the sky of dozens of first-grade provinces was covered with the shadows of Supreme Towers. This was not good news. The overall strength of these Supreme Oracles was so strong that nothing could deceive their eyes. Wuxia shook his head. It looked like it was not going to be easy for the 6 dynasties to gain a foothold on Pangu continent. What made Wuxia even more nervous was that both he and Princess Zhonglu had sensed the evil force that kept sweeping across Pangu continent in the void. Every time a wave of force swept across their bodies, Wuqi's heart would twitch violently. Even Ao Buzan looked worried in the face of the invasion of this force, and he was no longer as lazy and arrogant as usual. It was a curse cast by an almighty expert from the Directorate of Celestials, looking for the suspect who killed Gaochen Guang. If Wuqi had not used the chaotic energy to erase the remaining aura of the people of the 6 dynasties, and erase some of the karmic ties between them and Gaochen Guang, they would have been found by the people from the Directorate of Celestials by now. Wuqi could only hope that the emperors and courtiers of the other 5 dynasties could keep a low profile. In the face of the furious Diyu dynasty, Wuqi and the others were still too weak. In the face of such an impenetrable search, a careless mistake could lead to disaster. Wuqi could not help but fly into a rage out of humiliation. Wasn't it just Gaochen Guang? Did they have to be so nervous? What troubled Wuqi even more happened. Just as they were about to enter High Province, the puppet Wuqi had left in the East Sea City sent him a warning. Someone had sneaked into the East Sea City and attacked Wuqi, who was seriously injured and unconscious. The evil flame in Wuqi's belly exploded in an instant. Chapter 663. Together with the emperor and ministers of Great Yen, Wuqi met up with the army led by Su Qin and Yen Bugui at the border of East Sea County. Su Qin and Yen Bugui breathed a sigh of relief at the same time when they saw Wuqi return safely. Over the past few days, the celestial fiend puppet Wuqi had left in East Sea County, disguised as him, had been attacked 9 times in a row. Poisonous gases, venomous bugs, assassins who sneaked into the bedroom, strange curses, and many other things had implicated and killed more than 3,000 soldiers of East Sea County. Fortunately, the puppet did not have a body of flesh and blood, and it did not have a soul to be attacked. Although the assassins had attacked it 9 times in a row, except for one attack that almost cut it into pieces, the other attacks were all neutralized by Su Qin and his men, who came to the scene after hearing the news. The puppet, which was almost cut into pieces, only swallowed a few 100 kilograms of copper and iron ingots, and its body had basically returned to normal. Su Qin had also brought the puppet over, and Wuqi had put it back into his body. After a brief discussion with Su Qin and Yen Bugui about the current situation in East Sea County, Wuqi bade farewell to the emperor and ministers of Great Yen. Princess Zhonglu would follow Yen Dan and the others to Anlu County and Anyi County. Su Qin and Yen Bugui would hand over the control of the 2 counties to Great Yan's imperial court, and Princess Zhonglu would spend some time to gradually release the people of Great Yen from her interstitial world, letting them settle down in Anlu County and Anyi County. The first batch of people to be released would certainly not be the entire population that Great Yen had brought to Pangu continent. At most, it would be several tens of thousands of people. Only when Great Yen had completely taken control of the 2 counties, could all the people be gradually released to fill the 2 counties. Not only Great Yen, but also the people of the other 5 dynasties were still sleeping in Princess Zhang Li's interstitial world. Apart from a large number of civil and military officials of the 5 dynasties who had been released, the members of the imperial clan were still sleeping in the interstitial world. For a long period of time in the future, Princess Zhongli would be running around, gradually releasing the people from her interstitial world, according to the requirements of the Six Nations. This was a very difficult thing to do, but for the sake of the Six-Nation Alliance, this was the only way. Gazing at Princess Zhongli and the others who were leaving, Wuqi turned to look at the dozens of scouting officers standing beside him, and said in a flat tone, "Return to the East Sea County. Hey, those assassins caught them alive, but not a single one of them is willing to say who sent them?" A scouting officer cupped his fist and bowed respectfully to Wuqi, then shook his head helplessly. In the 9 assassination attempts, 7 to 8 of the assassins were captured alive, but all of their souls were tightly sealed with restrictive spells. He had once used a soul-searching technique to interrogate one of the assassins, but the result was that the assassin exploded and died on the spot, nearly dragging Su Qin into it. With a cold snort, Wuqi turned to Lu Qingfeng and the others who had just been released by Princess Zhongli, shook his head, and said, "Big brother, brothers, this is the current situation. We are all brothers of the same family, so let's cut to the chase. The affairs of East Sea City and even East Sea County must be handled quickly." Lu Qingfeng nodded, then cupped his fist and said to Wuqi with a smile, "Of course. This is the foundation of U.S. brothers, and we must take care of it wholeheartedly." Looking around at the vast and boundless wilderness, Lu Qingfeng breathed out a long sigh and said, "When you and I were in Little Meng City in the past, we never thought that we would have such an opportunity today. Ha ha ha, in such a vast world, we have a bright future ahead of us." At Wuqi's order, the 100,000 iron-armored soldiers released by Princess Zhongli from Qiqi's interstitial world let out a loud cry. Together, Wuqi and Ao Buzin rolled up a gust of strong wind, and a dark cloud rose from the ground. The 100,000 elite soldiers, who had been trained by Lu Qingfeng, Zhang Hu, and the others over the years, rose into the air and flew toward East Sea City. These 100,000 soldiers were the elites that Great Yen had carefully trained over the years. Since Yen Bugui and the others sent the true body of heaven and earth scripture and other cultivation techniques of the human race back to Great Yen had recruited a large number of soldiers and began to cultivate the cultivation techniques of the human race. These 100,000 elite soldiers were the best of the best. And because they were trained by Lu Qingfeng and the others, there was absolutely no problem in their loyalty. Among these soldiers, the strongest could already fight against nascent soul cultivators, and the weakest could fight against Jindan cultivators. Although their cultivation bases were a little too weak on Panga continent, they were on Panga continent, and their cultivation bases would definitely grow very quickly, especially when Wuqi could exchange a large number of blood sacrifices with Lei Ming in exchange for power. He did not have to worry about the cultivation bases of these soldiers. With 100,000 Xiongpai in hand, together with a group of capable officials brought by Lu Qingfeng and the others, Wuqi's administrative, military, penal, and civil affairs framework of East Sea County was finally complete. As long as Wuqi kept transferring resources to East Sea County, together with the hundreds of millions of Great Yan's people in Princess Zhongli's reserve, the future development of East Sea County would surely reach a climax. With Ao Buzin, the freshly minted true dragon of Gold Immortal Realm, a 10,000 miles long gust of wind blew the dark clouds and rushed toward East Sea City. After spending more than 20 hours on the road, the East Sea City came into sight. In the farmlands outside the city, countless farmers were meticulously tending to the crops in the fields. A gentle breeze blew across the fields, and waves of green waves reflected a little bit of green light under the sunlight. Far in the distance, thousands of white sails were gliding across the smooth surface of the ocean. Large trawls made by Su Qin were being pulled by fishing boats and scooped up a large number of fishes. When Wu Qi and his company were flying across the ocean, they happened to see a large fish being pulled up, and the joyful laughter of fishermen could be heard echoing across the ocean. Between the plains and the sea, on the mountains that surrounded the East Sea City like arms, some herb gatherers and hunters were roaming in the woods. Occasionally, a powerful wild beast would pounce on them and attack them. The well-trained soldiers of Donghai City would raise their iron shields and spears and charge forward. These beasts that ordinary people couldn't deal with were killed on the spot. These beasts already had the aura of demonic beasts, but they still possessed the aura of demonic beasts. Controlling the dark clouds, Ao Buzan circled the East Sea City a few times. Lu Chengfeng and the others could not help but laugh happily as they looked down at the lively cities and villages below. This was a good place, 100% good place. Everything was so pleasing to the eye, and everything made one feel comfortable. Even the wind blowing from the surface of the sea, which carried the fishy smell of the sea, was full of vitality and abundant energy. Everything here had a primitive and simple feeling, just like a piece of unpolished jade, waiting for Lu Chengfeng and his companions to study and carve it. Seeing the satisfied smile on Lu Chengfeng and the others' faces, Wuqi nodded delightedly as well. Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other immortals who had submitted to Wuqi, who had been silent all this while, finally smiled. There was no need to deliberately search for energy veins or caves, and no need to build a cave abode. Any place on Pangu continent had more natural energy than Myriad Immortals' planet. This was a good place for cultivation, a real blessed land. It was hard to imagine how rich the natural energy would be if they could find a good cave abode here, and communicate with a few underground energy veins to attract natural energy. Wu Qi scanned the mountains in the distance with his divine sense, and found that the mountains were filled with powerful energy ripples. Clearly, they were filled with all kinds of spirit herbs. When he looked at the mountains in the distance with his Dharma eyes, he saw 5 colored beams of light shooting up into the sky from under the sand. He could tell that the reserves of various ores in the mountains were extremely rich, thousands, even tens of thousands of times richer than Myriad Immortals' planet. Pangu continent is indeed a good place. Patriarch Jiang Yun stroked his beard and smiled, while Daoist Qing Xian and the others kept nodding and praising. All of them were taking deep breaths and laughing happily. The disciples of White Cloud Immortal Sect and Tranquil Vimla Sect were smiling brightly as well. Some of the disciples with lower seniority and cultivation base were so dizzy that they could barely stand straight. The concentration of natural energy here was so strong that they were intoxicated by it. Smiling, Wu Qi said to Patriarch Jiang Yin, "Patriarch, let's settle down the army of 100,000 soldiers first. After that, I'll accompany the few patriarchs to choose a blessed land to build a cave abode. The few patriarchs are the revered elders of Underhand sect, and I'll have to rely on them for many things in the future." Patriarch Jiang Yun and the other old immortals nodded happily, while the disciples of both sects were overjoyed. They had encountered a really good thing this time. After 2 days of busy work, Wu Qi finally settled down the people he brought with him. 100,000 soldiers were stationed in 4 camps in the East Sea City, each under the command of Meng Xiaobai, Luo Kadi, and a few others. Lu Chengfeng became the highest administrative officer in East Sea County. Apart from Wu Qi and Princess Zhang Le, he had the final say in all the affairs of the military court, Directorate of Celestials, Agriculture Court, Priest Court, and many other institutions. Lu Ziyuan and a large number of Lu Qingfeng's trusted subordinates had filled all the departments in East Sea County, and the administrative efficiency of East Sea County was immediately raised by more than 100 times. Meanwhile, Patriarch Jiang Yin and the other 2 ancestral masters and their disciples had built a cave abode in a smoky mountain about 10,000 miles west of East Sea City. 1,000 boys with excellent spirit roots and aptitudes were carefully selected from all over the East Sea County by Wu Qi. The abundant natural energy, endless cultivation resources, and the large number of new disciples had made Patriarch Jiang Yun and the others overjoyed, making them dance with joy. Wanying Dragon King, who had left Myriad Immortals' planet with Wu Qi, was delighted to meet his son here. Together with a few old dragon kings and many aquatic demons, as well as Lord Xiansheng, Catfish Flood Dragon, and many others, they had built a city in the ocean near East Sea County, preparing to build a magnificent crystal palace. Driven by his wicked sense of humor, Wu Qi had named the Crystal Palace the Dragon Palace of East Sea. Driven by Wu Qi's wicked sense of humor, Wanying Dragon King had changed his name to Ao Guang, the Dragon King of East Sea. Finally, after arranging the people of Meng Village to stay in the most fertile valley outside East Sea City, Wu Qi finally had the time to visit the few assassins who were captured alive in the dungeon of the city. In a dark and damp dungeon, on top of a cross made of black stone, a few skinny, fierce-looking men were chained to the cross naked. They were the unlucky men who had tried to assassinate Wuqi 9 times in a row, but failed in the end. But they did not know that what they were trying to assassinate was not Wuqi himself, but the celestial fiend puppets Wuqi had left in East Sea County. Slowly, Wuqi came before these assassins, frowning as he studied their naked bodies. "Tell me, who asked you to assassinate me?" Wuqi was a little angry as he cried out. "You should know that I've always been seriously wounded, lying in bed and unable to move. Yet you still want to assassinate me? Who has such a deep grudge against me?" The few assassins turned to look at Wuqi. A mysterious smile appeared on their faces, and suddenly, their bodies began to swell up. Boom, boom. A few loud booms rang out, and the dungeon, which occupied an area of nearly 100 acres, collapsed. Chapter 664. Without giving Wuqi any chance to ask questions, the few assassins immediately detonated their fleshly bodies the moment they saw Wuqi. Their souls turned into countless wisps of dark green smoke that could be seen with naked eyes and shot out in all directions, interweaving into a huge net that enveloped Wuqi and the others. Vaguely, shrill and unpleasant ghost howls could be heard coming out of the net. No one knew how many evil ghosts the attack had attracted. The 100-acre dungeon collapsed. Wuqi pointed his fingers in the air and produced primordial runes that flowed like water, which transformed into a pitch-black, bell-shaped restrictive barrier that protected everyone from the terrible explosion. When the shock waves of the explosion gradually subsided, he brought everyone out of the ground. The dungeon, which was originally deep underground, had turned into a huge pit that measured about 100 acres in circumference and hundreds of feet deep. The bodies of these assassins exploded, and their blood and flesh melted into a sticky stream of venom. Even the rocks and soil on the ground were corroded by the venom and turned into smoke, slowly rising into the air. That sizzling noise sounded like countless silkworms swallowing leaves, which could make anyone's hair stand straight up. Men of death. Wuqi flew back to the ground with everyone. Gritting his teeth, he stared at the completely destroyed dungeon, then waved his hand and ordered Huang Liang to summon the civil servants to backfill the pit. Before that, he also needed to get some antidotes from the Directorate of Celestials and sprinkle them into the pit to neutralize the poison. Needless to say, who else but Yu Miao could have such a deep grudge against Wuqi that he would send assassins of death and use such a vicious method to kill Wuqi? Wuqi had been involved in the power struggle between the Yu clan of Zhong Province and the Yu clan of Liangzhu. Although he was just an insignificant character in this matter, how could Yu Miao, who felt that he had lost face and been thrown into confusion, let go of Wuqi? This assassination might just be the vanguard of the countless assassinations that would follow. With the viciousness and cruelty of Yu Miao's curses, and the fact that the venom from the bodies of these assassins contained some other evil tricks, it was very likely that this piece of land could no longer be used in the future. Wuqi's intuition told him that the venom would turn this piece of land into a land of death. It might not be a barren land, but he could not expect this piece of land to be rich in water, grass, and livestock in the future. Men of sacrifice? Lu Qingfeng laughed eerily. So there are people on Pangu continent who raise men of sacrifice? Hee, I really want to see who is stronger between their men of sacrifice and the assassins of Great Yen. Wuqi's eyes lit up. He thought of the assassins he and Lu Qingfeng had met in Great Yen, who had no fear of death, who did not care about their own lives or the lives of others, and who were cruel, evil, cunning, and ferocious. Wuqi immediately assigned the task to Lu Qingfeng, asking him to contact Princess Zhonglu as soon as possible, asking Princess Zhonglu to provide some feasible and vicious methods, and asking Lu Qingfeng to select a batch of assassins immediately. Assassinations? Wuqi could not help but grin coldly. How many sons and grandsons do you have who can withstand the endless assassins sent by Wuqi? If you want to play, I'll play with you. Wuqi clenched his jaw and made up his mind. While the East Sea City was dealing with the trouble caused by the desperate assassins, a few guards from the county governor mansion arrived in a hurry. The prefecture overseer of High Province, Yu Miao, had arrived at the county governor mansion of East Sea with a group of attendants, and had asked to see Wuqi. The person who brought the guards to see Wuqi was Yan Feiyu, a minor civil servant brought by Lu Qingfeng. These civil servants trained by Lu Qingfeng were very perceptive. Yan Feiyu told Wu Qi respectfully that Yu Miao's face was unsightly, and that there were a few middle-aged men around him who seemed to be very rude to Yu Miao. It seemed that Yu Miao was being suppressed by them. As the supervisor of the county governor mansion, Yan Feiyu was responsible for greeting visitors, serving tea, guarding the door, and arranging guards. Just now, he had taken the opportunity of asking the maidservants to serve tea to observe the relationship between Yu Miao and the few middle-aged men. When Yu Miao asked about Wu Qi's current situation, he seemed very concerned, and even a little worried. But the tones of the few middle-aged men were unpleasant. Judging from their gloating tone, it seemed that they could not wait for Wu Qi to die as soon as possible. Before one wave had subsided, another wave had arisen. Wu Qi sneered and nodded at Lu Qingfeng. Lu Qingfeng then left to deal with the various affairs in East Sea City, while Wu Qi brought hundreds of guards who practiced the true body of heaven and earth scripture, and rode a tall horse to the county governor mansion. In Diyu's usual style, a snake-shaped flying ship and a scorpion-shaped flying ship were hovering side by side over the county governor mansion, about 3 miles above the ground. The snake-shaped flying ship was Yu Miao's ride, so Wu Qi was naturally familiar with it. But the flying ship, which looked like a scorpion with 4 wings on its back, gave off a ghastly evil air. The black scorpion-shaped flying ship was covered with a layer of unknown scales, which should have been removed from some kind of serpent. The head of the ship was round, and there was a faint green gleam flickering in the scorpion-shaped mouthpiece, which should be the nozzle of some powerful weapon. On the other hand, a barb shaped like a scorpion's tail was poking out from the back of the ship. It was about 10 feet in diameter, and glinted with a pale green gleam, while several dozens of bizarre runes could be vaguely seen flashing on its sharp tip. Even from such a long distance, Wu Qi could smell the fishy smell coming out from the tip. Calmly scanning the ship with his divine will, Wu Qi was shocked to find that the flying ship was actually made from the shell of a giant scorpion, about 3 miles long. According to the Scroll of Stealing, there was only one kind of giant scorpion, the green-tailed scarlet heart scorpion. It was a vicious creature whose venom could destroy the soul of even a gold immortal. In other words, this scorpion could fight against a gold immortal, and one could easily imagine the cost of making it into a flying ship. Compared to this flying ship, Yu Miao's snake-shaped flying ship was like a shabby 3-wheeled motorcycle parked next to a luxury limousine. Without batting an eyelid, Wu Qi dismounted in front of the county governor's mansion, and walked into the mansion with a large group of guards. In the main hall of the mansion, Yu He, with a gloomy face, was staring blankly with a teacup in his hand. The tea had cooled, but he did not move at all. A few other middle-aged men dressed in coarse black robes were sitting on the large stone chairs in the main hall, leisurely tasting the tea that had been brewed into plain water. Standing next to Yu He were 6 moon oracles, and the sleeves of the few middle-aged men were embroidered with at least 7 crescent moons, while the dozen or so oracles standing behind them had more than 4 crescent moons embroidered on their sleeves. Obviously, the leader of the group was a middle-aged man who wore 3 dark green jade rings on his fingers. He had a square face, and his skin was fair like the finest jade. 9 crescent moons were embroidered on his sleeves, and they were all embroidered with golden threads. Clearly, he was a formidable expert who could break through the realm of sun and step into the realm of gold immortal at any time. The sound of footsteps rang out as Wu Qi walked slowly into the hall. He left all the guards outside the hall, and walked into the hall with a calm and composed expression. Smiling and bowing to Yu He, Wu Qi said slowly, "Elder brother Yu Miao, I am in the middle of a war with Myriad Immortal Alliance. How did you find the time to come here? Tan Lang is useless. He was wounded by a few fiend immortals last time. After recuperating for so long, he has just fully recovered." When Yu He saw Wu Qi come in, he quickly put down his teacup and bowed to Wu Qi. When he heard Wu Qi say that he had fully recovered, he could not hide the joy that had welled up in his heart. Before he could say anything, he burst out laughing. He came up to Wu Qi excitedly, took Wu Qi's hand and said, "Wonderful. Have you really recovered? I've been so busy these past few months that I didn't have time to visit you in East Sea County. Have you really recovered?" Grinning coldly, Wu Qi gave the few middle-aged men a sidelong glance and said coolly, "Of course I've recovered. Otherwise, why would there be assassins coming to me? A while ago, I had just devoured the hundreds of millions of evil spirits that rushed into my head, and just as my overall strength had taken a big step forward, some assassins came knocking on my door. What a pity! I've captured them alive, and they even said that Elder Yu Miao sent them to kill me. As soon as Wuqi said that, Yu Miao's face froze abruptly. The middle-aged man with a dignified appearance raised his brows, rose to his feet slowly, and said with a cold grin, "Tan Lang, don't talk nonsense. You can't implicate my father in such groundless things." The corner of Wu Qi's mouth twitched as he raised his chin at the man and asked coolly, "Who is this?" Yu Miao grinned darkly, clasping his hands behind his back as he looked at the man and said, "Elder Yu Miao's son, my uncle Yu Lei. I'm here because someone complained to Prefecture Overseer Bo, saying that our Yu clan has placed a cripple, who is seriously injured and has his soul devoured, as the lord of a county, which occupies more than 30% of the land in Hai Province. Hee, Elder Yu Miao sent Uncle Yu Lei here." Wu Qi nodded as if he was suddenly enlightened. "If I'm still seriously injured, or if I've been killed by the assassins, His Excellency Yu Lei will become the new county governor of East Sea, right? What a pity. I was able to get out of bed 2 months ago, and I've been feeling better these days. Those assassins have also confessed that Elder Yu Miao sent them to kill me. What should I do now?" Yu scolded hypocritically. Tan Lang, Elder Yu Miao sent someone to assassinate you, but he needs evidence." Wu Qi grinned and clasped his hands behind his back, not saying a word. Yu Lei's expression flickered slightly. Looking at Wu Qi, who was alive and kicking without any sign of injury, he shook his head thoughtfully. After sizing up Wu Qi for a long time, Yu smiled faintly and said, "Well, since General Tan Lang is safe and sound, it's easy to get back to Prefecture Overseer. General Tan Lang is in good health, so I'm sure he can take good care of East Sea County." As he spoke, Yu Lei suddenly stretched out his right hand and thrust it toward Wu Qi like the poisonous tail of a scorpion. A shrill whistle rang out as a beam of green light shot straight toward Wu Qi's forehead. Wu Qi gave a cold snort as a plume of black mist sprayed out of his body, amidst which could be vaguely seen flashing with bolts of lightning. Without hesitation, he performed an incantation gesture, and 13 bolts of lightning, each as thick as a bowl, shot whistling out of the mist in a row, shattering the green light and heading straight toward Yu Miao's face. Yu Lei laughed and a large amount of green mist with a fishy stench surged out from his body, dispersing the lightning. After that, he led the large group of attendants around him, and left without saying a word. In the blink of an eye, he had walked out of the hall. They flew up and entered the scorpion-shaped flying boat. Not long after, the flying boat disappeared without a trace. After a full quarter of an hour, a faint cold snort was heard coming from the horizon. "Cultivating both fleshly body and magic? You do live up to your reputation. Tan Lang, Yu Lei will remember you." Chapter 665. On the golden sand, the sound of drumming could be heard. A large group of strong and handsome girls danced merrily on the beach, their bodies red against the bonfire, making them look like flaming fairies who had descended to the mortal world. Whole cows, sheep, little whales, and skewers of chickens, ducks, and geese were being roasted over the bonfire, their bodies dripping with oil. A strong aroma drifted far away with the sea breeze, and the sound of laughter drowned out the sound of the tide. A curtain measuring 1,000 feet in both length and width was formed by black brocade, and Wu Qi and Yu were sitting behind it with their attendants, drinking and having fun. Wu Qi's attendants and personal guards were all burly men. Each of them had a burly body, and each of them was a tough man who could overturn a mountain with just one punch. As for Yuhi's attendants, more than 90% of them were skinny oracles who looked like they could be blown away by a gust of wind. The oracles brought here by Yuhi now had pale faces, and were racking their brains to think of a way to avoid the toasts of these burly men around Wu Qi. Some of the rough-looking men, such as the few hunters from Ming village, had already pinned a few oracles to the ground, forcing their mouths open and pouring wine into their mouths with wine jars. The few poor moon oracles who could fight against heaven immortals were like little chicks being beaten by a rainstorm before the violence of these burly men. They could not fight back at all, and were almost killed by the strong liquor they poured into their bodies. When these oracles were knocked out, the dancing girls rushed up and carried them to a small tent next to the curtain. Before long, the moans and gasps of girls could be heard. Wuqi and Yuhi looked at each other and grinned. The obscenity in their eyes made one wish that a bolt of lightning would fall from the sky and strike them to death. Yuhi was very satisfied with Wuqi's hospitality. In his opinion, Wuqi's arrangements were very thoughtful. The one-stop service of eating, drinking, and having fun was too warm. The wine and delicacies served were the best, and the men who served them were very enthusiastic. Although they were a little too enthusiastic, the dancing girls were really young and lovely. Even Yumu himself had taken a fancy to a few girls with very long legs and fair skin. He was already a little restless. If it weren't for Wuqi urging him to drink, he would have already rushed up to those girls. On the other hand, Wuqi was very satisfied with the human race that Yu Miao had sent to him. Unlike the warriors who cultivated the true body of heaven and earth scripture, the priests of Diyu were a scarce resource. Although the armies of Zhong province were usually accompanied by tens of thousands of oracles when they went to war, the number of official oracles in the entire Directorate of Celestials of Zhong province, including the Directorate of Celestials of the 300 provinces under its jurisdiction, did not exceed 500,000 people, excluding those apprentice oracles, who could have the patterns of stars, moon, and sun tattooed on their sleeves. Moreover, priestesses were different from ordinary warriors. Those warriors would retire once they reached the age limit, but priestesses were a lifelong profession. The total number of retired veterans and serving soldiers in Zhong province was definitely over 10 million, but there were only a little over 500,000 priestesses in the entire province. Penghu continent was not short of warriors. As long as they were men with a strong body and full of blood and energy, they were all good candidates for cultivating the true body of heaven and earth scripture. But what the oracles of Directorate of Celestials needed was not a strong body, but an innate power that allowed them to communicate with ghosts and gods. And this innate power was mostly inherited in the bloodline, just like the power of the ancient god that Princess Zhonglu inherited from her mother. If Wuqi wanted to make a living on Penghu continent, how could there be no oracles in his East Sea County? But now, the oracles of Directorate of Celestials in East Sea County were the 2 or 3 cats assigned to him by Yu Miao, and they were all the direct descendants of Yu clan, so there was no way they would be loyal to Wuqi. Therefore, taking the opportunity of Yu Miao bringing a large number of oracles to East Sea County, Wuqi shamelessly recruited beautiful girls to borrow his seed. Yu Miao had brought hundreds of oracles with him, and Wuqi had recruited 8,000 beautiful girls from the common people with a huge sum of money. And according to Wuqi's knowledge of physiology and hygiene, these girls were all pregnant in the past 2 days, and once they intercourse with a man, they were likely to get pregnant. The clothes of the dancing girls were specially designed by Wuqi. Short hot pants and short shirts that barely covered their breasts, exposing large areas of their fair skin. Coupled with the stimulation of the bonfire and liquor, they would definitely turn Yu Miao and those oracles from sanctimonious oracles into beasts in heat worse than beasts. There were only hundreds of girls dancing around the bonfire, but in the woods near the curtain, there were thousands more waiting to have sex with these oracles. Wuqi promised these girls that as long as their children had the aptitude to become oracles, these girls and their families would be supported by East Sea County, and their children would become lofty oracles. Wuqi had underestimated the people of Penghu continent's yearning for the mysterious, powerful, noble, and dignified profession of oracles. The 8,000 girls were all recruited without any effort, and under Wuqi's strategy, they would squeeze Yu Miao and the hundreds of oracles dry. Wuqi was very satisfied with the brilliant idea he had come up with, and he was even more satisfied with Lu Qingfeng's efficiency. Yu Miao and the others arrived in East Sea County at noon, but by dusk, the 8,000 girls were already ready, and all the preparations for the bonfire party were ready. They had even added some herbal juice to the liquor, which was suitable for aphrodisiac and could squeeze out the energy of men. 2 hours later, all the oracles Yu Miao brought with him had disappeared, and the sound of banging and moaning could be heard coming from the small tents near the curtain. After being pulled up by the ear by Wuqi and forced down 2 jars of liquor, Yu Miao was escorted into one of the tents by more than 20 girls in a daze. With a faint smile on his face, Wuxia stood in the middle of the curtain and quietly cast a strange magic, the hasten spell. It was a mystic magic that the ancient clans cast when they were having sex in order to multiply their population. It was invented by some bored innate gods in ancient times, and its only effect was to enhance the libido of men and increase the chance of pregnancy of women. A faint pink mist enveloped the whole beach, and the strange noises coming from the tents suddenly became very loud. The 8,000 carefully selected girls were all in their menstrual period, and coupled with the effect of the hemorrhagic curse, Wuxia had no doubt that in a few months, Donghai County would have 8,000 pregnant women with big bellies. In a few years, the East Sea County would have at least thousands of children who had the aptitude to become oracles. If they were brainwashed and educated from an early age, and carefully trained by Princess Zhonglu, an expert who was proficient in the great Tao of ancient gods, East Sea County would no longer have to worry about the lack of oracles. Chickens give birth to eggs, and eggs give birth to chickens. Chickens, eggs, and eggs are endless. Standing with his hands clasped behind his back and listening to the subtle noises coming from the small tents, Wuxia breathed a deep sigh and said, "It's not easy for me to run a territory. Pimping 8,000 people at once? I dare not say it will never happen again since ancient times, but it is an unprecedented feat." Shaking his head, Wuxia gave a cold snort. If not for the lack of population in his territory, Wuxia could really get tens of thousands of people to plant his seeds. If not for the fear that he would not be able to explain to Yu Miao if he killed some of them, Wuxia would also get hundreds of women from the Longbow Kingdom, whom he had placed in a secret ancient cave to recuperate. Unfortunately, the bodies of these oracles were as fragile as reeds. If those women from Longbow Kingdom were to get excited and accidentally use a little bit of strength, they might really lose their lives. Sighing with emotion, Wuxia stood in the tent from the wee hours of the morning, then noon, and afternoon. It was not until the evening of the next day that Yu Miao finally staggered out of the tent with the help of a few girls. Yu Miao, who was once handsome and elegant, now had his face turned blue, and his eye sockets were pitch black, making him look like a panda. His back was hunched and his body trembled as he walked out of the tent. His lips were sunken, and he looked as if he had lost a lot of weight. Before long, the curtains of the tents were lifted, and all the oracles had to be supported by the girls to get out. These poor oracles were very weak to begin with, and after 12 to 14 hours of hard work, they felt as if their brains and other bodily fluids had been completely squeezed dry. "What a passionate man," Yuhi said to Wuxia with a trembling voice. "Brother, I'm leaving now. You are too passionate, and they are too passionate. If I don't leave now, I'm afraid I won't be able to. Why, you must be careful of that old bastard, Yu Miao. He is not a man who is easy to talk to." After giving Wuxia a few words of advice, Yu Miao swallowed and glanced greedily at the girls around him, who were staggering as well. Suddenly he shuddered. Not daring to look at these beautiful girls any longer, he gritted his teeth and said, "Last night was really absurd. Brother, the girls in your territory are really too passionate. Fortunately, I still have some foundation, or else I wouldn't be able to stand up today." The oracles brought here by Yu Miao were also looking at the girls around them with complicated expressions. Last night, they had experienced the feeling of going straight from heaven to hell. At first, they were so happy that they felt like they were in heaven, but in the end, the feeling of having their bones scraped and their marrow sucked made them feel like they were in hell. But hell was so depressing that they had lost their minds and gone crazy. They did whatever the girls wanted, and even took the initiative to invade and violate. The legs of these oracles were weak, and they had no strength at all. But as Yu Miao had said, Wuxia was too passionate, and the girls in his territory were too passionate. The bewildering scene of 8,000 girls attacking about 600 oracles had left these oracles with blank memories, and they could not remember what had happened from last night to now. But it was so enjoyable that they felt like they were flying into the clouds. General Tanlang, the county governor of East Sea, is such a good man. Yu Mu, as well as the oracles he brought here, were all filled with deep gratitude to Wuxia, but they could not help but be traumatized by the girls in his territory. It was so terrible that many of them almost died last night. Naturally, Wuxia was reluctant to part with Yu Miao. He packed half of the local specialties of the flying ship for Yu Miao, picked a few beautiful girls, and sent them to the ship. Only then did he wave goodbye to Yu Miao. Wuxia promised that when he straightened out the backlog of affairs in East Sea County, he would immediately lead an army to fight against the people of Myriad Immortal Alliance. At the same time, he reminded Yu Miao to be careful of Yu Miao's sneak attack. After a long time of busying himself and seeing Yu Miao and his companions off, Wuqi's face suddenly darkened. He immediately returned to the county governor's mansion and summoned all the high-ranking officials around him. He wanted to retaliate against Yu Miao with the cruelest means. Chapter 666. The only thing Wuxia discussed in the meeting with Lu Qingfeng and others was how to retaliate against Yu Miao. How many times had Yu Miao tried to kill Wuxia by sending assassins to kill Wuxia? Coupled with the palm strike Yu Miao had given Wuxia when he first came to Penghu continent, Yu Miao had tried to kill Wuxia several times. On several occasions, Wuxia had been forced into a desperate situation by Yu Miao, and this time, it was Yu Miao who sent assassins to kill Wuxia while he was seriously injured. The public news was that Wuxia was seriously injured, but everyone knew that East Sea County was a private territory that Yu Miao had infeft to Wuxia after he had helped Wuxia seize the power of the prefecture overseer of High Province. Wuxia was seriously injured, and it was very likely that his soul had been devoured by an evil spirit, never to wake up again. Under such circumstances, Yu Miao did not take any action against East Sea County. Instead, it was Yu Miao who could not wait to strike. It was less than a year since Wuxia went back and forth between outer heavenly realms. Yu Miao had probably sent someone to inquire about Wuqi's injury, and found that Wuxia was indeed bedridden because his soul was seriously injured, leaving only a few subordinates to take care of the affairs of East Sea County. After that, Yu Miao immediately sent assassins to kill Wuxia, and at the same time sent his son, Yu Lei, to seize control of East Sea County. Yesterday, Yu Miao accompanied Yu Lei to East Sea County. According to Yan Feiyu's investigation and Yu Miao's own account, it was clear that Yu Lei had used Yu Miao's power to force Yu Miao to come to East Sea County and seize control of East Sea County for him. According to the laws of Diyu, for a newly infeft governor like Wuxia, if he didn't have any relatives or descendants, which meant he didn't have an heir, and if Wuqi's soul was seriously injured and might not be able to recover, his direct superior must send a competent official to handle the affairs of the territory. Yu Mu had given Wuxia a lot of face. Although Wuxia was seriously wounded and bedridden, Yu Mu paid no attention to the affairs of East Sea County, as if he did not know that Wuxia had violated Diyu's law. Wuxia would never forget this friendship. Although Yu Miao had the bad habits of a young master from an influential clan, he was a man of loyalty. But Yu Miao and Yu Lei's table manners were too unsightly, which made Wuxia even angrier. By any means, we have to give Yu Miao a warning. Wuxia explained the cause and effect of the matter to Lu Qingfeng, and then gave him the order. Lu Qingfeng did not waste any time. He immediately ordered a group of trusted subordinates to make the arrangements. With the manpower and resources Lu Qingfeng had at his disposal now, it was impossible for him to kill a great oracle like Yu Miao, who possessed an overall strength equal to that of a gold immortal. But if it was only for Yu Miao's sons and grandsons, those who were related to Yu Miao, and the shops run by Yu Miao's people, Lu Qingfeng would be able to handle it perfectly. Great Yan had always cultivated assassins, and with his identity as Duke Yanlu of Great Yan, together with the rich profits brought to him by Star-Picking City and Little Meng City, Lu Qingfeng had raised nearly 10,000 men of sacrifice over the past few years. These men of sacrifice had followed Wuxia to Penghu continent, and were now training in a secret valley outside East Sea City. With the help of all kinds of vicious curses, deadly immortal talismans, and powerful weapons from Mo sect, these thorns would make Yu Miao's heart bleed over and over again like thorns. When Yu Miao and those elders around him were almost weakened, it would be time for Wuxia to teach Yu Miao a hard lesson. East Sea County had begun its operation. Teams of assassins were sent out after Wuxia had cast all kinds of vicious curses on their souls. A large number of intelligence agents swarmed out, infiltrating Zhong province and the 300 provinces under its jurisdiction. Lu Qingfeng, Lu Ziyuan, and others had very strong administrative ability and efficiency. Under their deployment, in just a few days, East Sea County had established a preliminary framework of highly efficient intelligence and assassination departments. When Wu Qi was severely wounded by the primordial gold talisman, when he was traveling across Panga continent on foot, he had created many celestial fiend puppets and sent them to various places to develop his own forces. On top of that, he had also rescued tens of thousands of cultivators from the mine of Miaoying Palace in the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. Those cultivators were controlled by him with a restrictive spell, and he had assigned them to his puppets, who had built up various forces of various sizes in various places. Even when Diyu was wiping out the itinerant cultivators of Myriad Immortal Alliance, these puppets had done a good job. They were lurking in all the cities and towns in Diyu, spreading their networks in all directions like spiders. With the help of the forces and networks established by these puppets, the intelligence agents sent by East Sea County soon infiltrated every aspect of Zhong province. 7 days later, Wu Qi received the first report of an assassin. 3 assassins had openly attacked Yu Miao's great-grandson and great-granddaughter on the street of Zhongning City. 2 of them were killed on the spot, and the dozen guards accompanying them were killed by the self-detonation of the assassins. 2 moon oracles of Yu clan, who had rushed to the rescue after hearing the news, were also severely wounded by a powerful immortal talisman made by Sun Kuang at a close distance by a hidden assassin. One of them had lost an arm, and the other a leg. The hidden assassin had also self-detonated before he could be captured alive. Over the next 3 days, news of the battle kept coming. In just 3 to 4 days, 3 sons and 1 daughter, 5 grandsons and 7 granddaughters, 13 great-grandsons and 21 great-granddaughters of Yu Miao's huge group of descendants were assassinated. A total of 107 shops owned by Yu Miao and his descendants were attacked at the same time. All the shopkeepers and workers were killed, and all their assets were looted. The families and properties of the Yu clan elders who were related to Yu Miao had also been attacked, and the success rate had reached a terrifying 100%. The sudden blow made all the members of Yu clan feel dizzy. Yu clan had never encountered such a blow, which was as swift and violent as a thunderbolt, as bizarre as the corrosion of a ghost, and as vicious and merciless as it was. It must be admitted that although the history of the Yu dynasty was much longer than that of Great Yan, when it came to the use of assassins, the members of Great Yan's imperial clan were definitely the patriarchs of all the influential figures in Diyu, including the human emperor. From the formulation of the operation plan, from the selection of targets to the timing of the attack, and the coordination of the assassins sent by Yu Miao were like thugs on the street, while the assassins sent by Lu Qingfeng were professional masters. And that was because the cultivation base of these assassins was too weak, so they could only target the ordinary people among Yu Miao's descendants who did not have any cultivation base. When the members of these assassins who practiced the true body of heaven and earth scripture, and the other cultivation techniques of the human race, spent a few years improving their cultivation base, these assassins would turn from ordinary wooden thorns and iron thorns into poisonous fangs, giving Yu Miao a heart-wrenching pain with just 1 strike. Wu Qi could not help but keep nodding as he enjoyed the summary of the results of the operation brought back by the intelligence agents. Lu Qingfeng had ordered all the assassins to suspend all operations. He had to give Yu Miao some buffer time, so that he who had raised his guard could gradually relax. Yu clan was now on high alert, and a large number of experts were protecting all the members of their direct line of descent. It was no longer as easy as it was a few days ago. Let Yu Miao and the others suffer in pain and anger, and when I have the chance, I'll give Yu Miao a few hard blows. This is revenge, Wu Qi's revenge on Yu Miao. He had to do it slowly and patiently. These assassins were a group of extremely patient killing machines, and as their master, he had to be more patient than them. Yu Miao is crying, isn't he? Wu Qi sneered. With a flip of his palm, all the reports turned into wisps of smoke. Pass down my order. Assemble 10,000 soldiers and follow me to the battlefield. Wu Qi burst into laughter and cried out. Huang Liang, assemble 10,000 soldiers and select 10,000 of our new soldiers with the strongest cultivation base. Assemble the army and follow me to join the war with General Bo Yunting." The people of the 6 dynasties had been brought to Pangu continent by Wuxia, and they were now lying dormant in the wilderness, slowly accumulating their strength. Wuxia, on the other hand, wanted to work hard for himself and those around him. He wanted to seize as many military exploits as he could, so that his military rank could continue to rise, and he could grasp more and more power and resources in Great Yen, a behemoth. When he rose one step, the people around him could rise one step, and the 6 dynasties could rise one step as well. And when the 6 dynasties rose one step, the people around him could rise one step, and he could rise another step as well. Wuxia was not as ambitious as Yingzheng and the other emperors. He was not interested in the positions of the great celestial emperors of the celestial court. He just wanted to control his own life and death, to avenge the favors he owed, to avenge Lady Dark Goldwater, Reverend Gale, and to avenge Wu Wang and Lu Xiaobai. But when he thought about the enemies Wuxia would have to deal with in the future, Green City was not a problem, for it was just a lackey sent by the celestial court. But the revenge of Reverend Gale would be a big problem. If the mighty Eastern Green Emperor wanted to avenge him, perhaps Wuxia would have to have the power and status of the great emperor of the celestial court. With all kinds of messy thoughts in his mind, Wuxia was about to urge Huang Liang to prepare the army for war when a long and drawn-out Buddhist chant suddenly came from outside the city. In just a blink of an eye, it had spread across the entire territory of East Sea County. "The Buddha is merciful, all living beings are suffering. When can they be freed from the tumultuous mortal world? When can they transcend the pain of transmigration? When can they join the Buddhist League? They will be blessed with boundless peace and joy. All living beings can enjoy great purity, great freedom, great joy, and great happiness. The Buddha is merciful. Benefactors, can you stop for a moment and listen to a scripture of transcendence from me?" Wuxia was taken aback. Suddenly he sprung to his feet and cursed angrily. When he met Madman Shui the other day, the agreement they reached was very clear. Those bald monks were not allowed to enter East Sea County, or even High Province. Madman Shui had agreed to it at that time, but what was going on with those monks outside the city? Before one wave had subsided, another wave had arisen. The matter with Yu Miao was still entangled, and now there was trouble here. Wuxia was really angry from the bottom of his heart. Chapter 667. Damn bald donkey, who did not keep his promise. Damn Lao Ai. How could he not teach his own disciple well? Or perhaps, Lao Ai had lost his mind, and was relying on the fact that Patriarch Miao Xian was backing him, so he had the guts to do something else? Countless thoughts were tumbling in Wuqi's mind. With a gloomy face and a strong killing intent, he rushed out of the county governor mansion. 12 large flying ships purchased by East Sea County at a high price soared into the sky, each carrying 1,000 fully armed soldiers. Even the dozens of oracles from the East Sea County's Directorate of Celestials had boarded the ships. Surrounded by a chilly wind and shrouded in a dark cloud, Wuqi sped toward the direction where the chanting came from. Right on the east side of East Sea County, on a small cliff about tens of miles into the ocean, a monk with a fat head, big ears, and fair skin that looked like solidified lard could be seen. His lips were rosy like those of a teenage girl, and his eyes shone like pearls. His long earlobes drooped down to his waist, and his chest was exposed. He was clad in a pair of yellow monk pants, a monk robe, and a pair of straw sandals weaved from long green grass. A wooden fish, about 3 feet in circumference and cast from pure gold, was placed right next to him. The monk was holding a wooden fish hammer, which was as thick as a fist, and was striking the wooden fish from time to time. The wooden fish hammer was forged with pure silver, and when it was struck, it would send sparks flying in all directions. The sonorous ringing of the wooden fish echoed in all directions, shaking the ears of Wu Qi and the others a few miles away. The closer they got to the monk, the harsher the ringing of the wooden fish became. When they were only about 1 mile away from him, the ringing had turned into a deafening thunderclap, causing all the soldiers on the flying ship, including Huang Liang, to lose their balance. Smilingly, the monk looked at Wu Qi and the others, who were charging toward him menacingly. Slowly, he struck the wooden fish and recited, "The sea of bitterness has no bounds. Repent and you will be saved. Every time he spat out a word, a golden lotus flower that was wrapped in a dense scarlet flame would spit out from the monk's mouth. This was the so-called golden lotus flower in one's mouth. There were 8 fist-sized characters floating within the stamen of the golden lotus, and they were constantly emanating dazzling golden light. The golden light wasn't dazzling, but the closer it got to the monk, the sharper the golden light became. It was like a sharp knife that cut into people's bodies. Wuxia flew into a rage and said, "Where did this baldy come from to spout nonsense here? Get out of the East Sea County." The East Sea County was where Wuxia started his business. Wuxia was like a wild beast with a strong sense of territory. Whoever dared to invade his territory, he would definitely fight back with all his strength. On top of that, Wuxia knew very well how frightening a religion could be, especially when it was a religion created by a Buddhist cultivator with a truly formidable power. Once their hands reached into the East Sea County, would the people, army, and officials of the East Sea County listen to these monks, or Wuxia? He would never allow any Buddhist disciple to develop in the East Sea County. If one came, he would kill one, and if a pair came, he would kill a pair. This was the condition agreed upon by Wuxia and Madman Shui. Seeing that the monk was openly using a Buddhist technique to recruit believers here, Wuxia wished he could smash his head with a punch. How could he show him a nice face? How could he deal with him with nice words? Wuxia was furious to the extreme. Madman Shui was the missionary disciple of Little Rui, delightful Buddha of Wishful Heaven realm. He should be able to control these monks who were recruiting believers everywhere. So, why did a monk suddenly come to the East Sea County to make trouble? Looking at Wuxia, the monk suddenly grinned and said with a gentle voice, "I suppose Your Excellency is the chief officer of this territory? Why don't Your Excellency join the Buddhist League and get rid of the pain of transmigration? Wouldn't that be a happy thing?" Before Wuxia could say anything, the monk said with a big smile, "The Buddhist League is vast, and all 3,000 great Taoists can be attained. If you want mountains of gold and oceans of silver, we have them. If you want beautiful women, we have them. If you want the power to kill, we have them. If you want a romantic life, we have them. In short, as long as you join the Buddhist League, you can have everything you want. Why don't Your Excellency and the army behind you convert to Buddhism?" Wuxia snorted coldly. He raised his right hand and shouted, "Crossbows!" 12 flying ships surrounded the monk in a semicircle, with countless crossbows aimed at him. The soldiers attached bone bolts, which were specially made to deal with powerful cultivators, to the crossbows. The dozens of oracles hurriedly crushed bone talismans, casting all kinds of defensive spells on the soldiers. Fearing that the power of these crossbows was not enough, Wuxia recited a few incantations under his breath, then bit the tip of his finger and flicked it. A stream of blood shot out, transforming into thousands of tiny talismans, and attached themselves to the arrowheads of the crossbow bolts. Shrill ghost howls rang out as these talismans immediately transformed into dark smoke and firmly imprinted themselves on the arrowheads. The once dull bone arrowheads twisted like melted candles, and even had a faint trace of a single-horned ghost head on them. The monk gave Wuxia a look of astonishment, then ran his eyes over Wuqia's tall and straight body like lightning bolts. "How did you learn the art of talismans? Judging from your body shape, I suppose you are practicing a cultivation technique that uses brute force?" Right after the monk's cry of astonishment rang out, thousands of arrows were shot out from all directions along with the jarring creaking of bowstrings, enveloping the monk's body in a whistling rain of arrows. The density of the arrows was too great. As they flew at high speed, they created turbulent air vortexes and produced shrill and long whistling noises that sounded like ghost howls. Laughing foolishly, the 9 scars on the monk's forehead emitted a large sheet of golden Buddhist light, which condensed into countless fist-sized muni pearls that flew all over the sky. Amidst a series of crackling noises, thousands of arrows were twisted and broken by the pearls, then exploded and sprayed out large plumes of dark smoke and evil aura. There were even large flashes of flame, thunderbolts, and water vapor that towered into the sky, while all kinds of energies kept bursting out from the arrows. "The Buddha saves the predestined one." The monk looked at Wuxia with a serious expression, smiled, and said, "But too bad, Your Excellency, you are not the predestined one. The people behind you are my predestined ones." With a flip of his palm, 2 golden lotuses shot out from it. Laughing strangely, the monk thrust the lotuses toward Wuxia and unleashed a tremendous suction force, wrapping Wuxia up with 2 beams of golden light, pulling both him and Ao Buzin, who was clinging on his collar. The golden lotuses closed inwardly, transforming into a sheet of golden light that hovered before the monk. The fat monk laughed foolishly, then turned to Huang Liang and his companions, who were dumbfounded, and said, "Benefactors, you are my predestined ones. Come, let me tell you about the magical art of Buddhism, and enlighten you with the wisdom of your previous lives." Laughing complacently, the monk shook his head and said, "Dear benefactors, please remember, I am Mingli, the missionary disciple of Prabhudaratna Buddha in the great freedom and happiness heavenly realm. Benefactors, once you join the Buddhist League, you will have everything you ask for, and you will have no worries for the rest of your lives." Trembling, Huang Liang looked at the monk, mustered up his courage, raised his right hand and said, "Formation. Dark shell 8 direction motionless formation." The dark shell 8 direction motionless formation was a defensive formation commonly used by human warriors, and could only be activated with the help of large weapons. Following Huang Liang's order, the 12 flying ships gathered inwardly, with the 4 ships in the middle moving in the direction of the 4 symbols, and the 8 ships on the outside moving in the direction of the 8 trigrams. The decks on both sides of the ships were slowly lifted up, and countless bronze chains darted out from the decks, intertwining and weaving into a large and thick net. A deep buzzing noise could be heard coming from the ships, while a dim green light shone from the bronze chains, growing stronger and stronger until it completely enveloped the 12 ships. The only oracles from East Sea County flew up into the sky and cast out a large number of bone talismans according to their positions, controlling the changes of the dark shell 8 direction motionless formation. As these oracles incanted a spell in a deep voice, the green light gradually condensed into a large and thick turtle shell, on which the patterns of the 8 trigrams could be clearly seen. Clear runes could be seen all over the turtle shell, and each rune vaguely formed the shape of a lofty mountain. Interesting, interesting. Dear benefactors, your destiny is still lacking a little bit of maturity." Monk Mingli laughed. He rolled up his sleeves and said carelessly, "Then, let this poor monk add a little more fuel to the fire and let all of you know what fate is." With the huge wooden fish in his left hand and the thick wooden fish hammer in his right, Mingli trod on a white cloud and flew slowly to the side of the dark shell 8 direction motionless formation. With the corners of his mouth drooping down, he smiled at Huang Liang, who was standing on the prow of the ship and commanding the ship. Then he raised the wooden fish forged from pure gold, and sent a large sheet of golden Buddhist light into the air. Like a golden shooting star, it smashed viciously onto the green turtle shell. With just one strike, a large sheet of auspicious light spread in all directions, and the formation formed by the 12 ships was knocked tens of miles away by Mingli. The soldiers on the ships lost their balance and fell to the deck one after another. The dozens of oracles controlling the formation gave a muffled snort as blood oozed out from their 7 apertures. Their palms, which had formed into finger seals, bounced off as if they were struck by thunderbolts. Electric arcs burst out from their fingertips and burned them to a crisp. "Counterattack! Counterattack!" cried Huang Liang at the top of his voice. Following Huang Liang's roar, the soldiers rose to their feet, controlled the ships, and launched a storm-like attack at Mingli. Streams of light, countless arrows, and a large number of javelins flew towards Mingli. While the outside was in a great mess, Wuxia, who was sucked into the golden lotus, found himself in a magical place. There was no sun or moon in the sky, but a bright light shone brightly, as bright as day. Amidst the auspicious clouds, as far as the eye could see, there was a large expanse of clear water. The water was as sticky as butter, and was emitting a faint fragrance. White lotus flowers were blooming in the clear water. As a breeze blew across, the lotus flowers danced gently, and a faint aroma came wafting out. Not far away, a lofty mountain stood towering amidst the boundless clear water. The mountain was about 1,000 miles tall, and about 100,000 miles in circumference. It looked majestic, like a crouching tiger lying between the heaven and the earth. Countless monasteries of various sizes could be seen on the mountain. These monasteries were all built with golden bricks, emitting a faint golden glow and purple mist under the bright sunlight. 108 streams of white mist were seen flying across the sky above the lofty mountain, and faint chanting of Buddhist scriptures could be heard coming from the countless monasteries. On the spacious stone steps in the mountain, large groups of monks and nuns were walking slowly with incense sticks and candles in their hands, chanting the name of Prabhudaratna. Buddha of great mercy and great compassion illuminates the universe. Every time they chanted the name of Buddha, a large amount of power of faith, invisible to the naked eye, would soar up into the sky and drill into the 108 streams of white mist. Audiobook raised his head from Wuxia's collar and cursed under his breath. This is going to be fun. These are the interstitial spaces crafted by the experts among those bald donkeys, the so-called Buddhist kingdom in a palm. One world in a grain of sand, 3,000 Buddhas in one world, and the Buddhist kingdom in a palm was the most mysterious and powerful divine ability of the Buddhist League. Those who could cultivate the Buddhist kingdom in a palm were existences at least at the level of golden bodhisattva. Chapter 668. Just like the interstitial worlds of immortals, the Buddhist League also had a Buddhist kingdom in a palm. At this moment, the small world where Wuxia and Audiobook were located was a Buddhist kingdom in a palm. Smoke was lingering in the air, a cool breeze was blowing, and the light of relics was shining in all directions. The majesty of the Buddhist League was naturally contained in every inch of the void. The lofty mountain in front of him was like a living prehistoric beast. The pressure emanating from it made Wuxia frown, and all his bones and tendons were creaking noisily, because of the pressure emanating from it. The Buddhist kingdom in a palm was different from the interstitial worlds of immortals. Heaven immortals with great luck and profound heritage could also refine their own interstitial worlds by chance. However, the Buddhist kingdom in a palm of a Buddhist cultivator was completely formed by the power of faith of his believers. Every blade of grass, every tree, every drop of water, and every stone was formed by pure power of faith. Without enough powerful Buddhist power and faith provided by enough believers, a Buddhist cultivator could never form his own Buddhist kingdom. Generally speaking, only a bodhisattva with the strength equivalent to a gold immortal, and a golden bodhisattva with an extremely profound cultivation base, could form a Buddhist kingdom. But when he saw Mingli outside, his cultivation base was at most a top-grade golden bodhisattva, and he was still a long way from the realm of bodhisattva. How could he form such a Buddhist kingdom? Standing on a lotus flower and looking at the mountain in front of him, Wuxia could see at least 10 million believers walking around the mountain, chanting the name of Buddha. With Ming Li's cultivation base, how could he gather so many devout believers? 10 million believers, not including those who were currently cultivating in the monastery, was a terrifying number. Only the most devout believers could be brought into the Buddhist kingdom at any time. Generally speaking, it would be very good if 1 out of 10,000 believers could meet the requirements, and only 1 out of 100 could be brought into the Buddhist kingdom. To gather more than 10 million devout believers here, it would take a very long time for the Buddhist kingdom to accumulate such a huge number of believers. Shaking his head, Wuxia murmured to himself in puzzlement. Audiobook's eyes were shining. He looked greedily at the countless believers walking slowly on the mountain, and whispered to Wuxia about the benefits of these believers. These believers were actually people who had died. After their corporeal bodies perished, their souls were received by the owner of the Buddhist nation, and arrived here. Their corporeal bodies were reformed by the Buddhist divine arts. These fleshly bodies were the amalgamation of pure energy and souls. Especially because they chanted scriptures all year round, their souls were especially nourished and strengthened. If they were believers who had lived in the Buddhist kingdom for more than 1,000 years, their soul power would be at least 100 times stronger than that of ordinary people. When Audiobook was still a lascivious dragon who went around flirting with innocent girls, there were already daring immortals of the fiendish Tao who specifically attacked the Buddhist kingdom of the bodhisattvas of the Buddhist League. Once they breached the Buddhist kingdom, they would use the fastest speed to abduct all the believers. These believers had extremely powerful souls, and they could be used to refine all kinds of fiendish Tao magical artifacts, which were countless times more powerful than those refined from the souls of ordinary people. After listening to Ao Buzan's introduction, Wuxia looked thoughtfully at Ao Buzan. Ao Buzan squinted his eyes and let out a strange laugh, spreading his two front paws to the left and right. He whispered to Wuxia that these believers in the Buddhist kingdom had many uses. Even if Wuxia had no use for them, he could still capture them and trade them. In Ao Buzan's memory, there were several secret trading markets opened by immortals of the fiendish Tao. Believers in the Buddhist kingdom were highly sought after in these markets. With 10,000 believers as a unit, each unit was worth tens of thousands of yuan, enough to make an immortal rich overnight. And here, there were at least 10 million believers of the Buddhist kingdom, who had lived for a long time, but did not have much fighting power. Wuqi's heart raced. His eyes glowed as he looked at the great mountain in front of him. Suddenly, he laughed coldly and said, "This monk must have lost his mind. Since he sent me here, he can't blame me for being rude, can he?" Laughing wildly, Wuxia had also thought of the use of these believers. Even if he could not trade them, they could be used as sacrificial offerings. Originally, Wuxia had nothing to do with these believers, but since Mingli had blatantly invaded Wuqi's territory and captured Wuxia with the mystic technique of the Buddhist kingdom in the palm, they could not blame Wuxia for being so cruel to them. He opened his mouth and inhaled. A large sheet of chaotic light sprayed out, and the believers who were walking slowly around the great mountain cried out in alarm at the same time. Their bodies floated up into the air and flew toward Wuqi's mouth along the chaotic light. Suddenly, a sonorous Buddhist mantra was heard coming from the largest temple on the top of the mountain. "The sea of bitterness has no bounds. Repent and you will be saved." Together with a vigorous Buddhist power, the mantra condensed into a thunderbolt in the void and smashed into Wuqi's spiritual ocean, trying to knock him out. However, Wuqi's spiritual ocean was vast and empty, and his innate chaotic divine soul was hidden in it, protected by the divine flame of order. As a result, the mantra was like a stone thrown into the ocean, disappearing without leaving any ripples. Wuqia snorted coldly, then performed a hand incantation gesture, and cast it toward the temple. After that, he chanted a thunder spell under his breath, getting ready to strike down a thunderbolt and raze the temple to the ground. However, right after the incantation gesture and incantation gesture were cast, Wuqia cried out in surprise. The incantation and incantation gesture he cast out did not work at all. He did not even sense a ripple of energy, and there was no thunderbolt as he expected. Ao Buzan breathed out a long sigh, then began to explain to Wuqia about the magical Buddhist kingdom in a palm. According to the cultivation technique they cultivated, the interstitial world of an immortal would have all kinds of extreme properties, such as an ocean of lava, a world of ice and snow, clouds and mists, thunderbolts, boundless hurricanes, and so on. However, the Buddhist kingdoms of Buddhist cultivators were all the same. Their Buddhist kingdoms didn't have any other power. What filled the Buddhist kingdoms was the pure Buddhist power cultivated by the Buddhist cultivators. How could an immortal cultivate the cultivation technique of Buddhist League? Therefore, after an immortal was imprisoned in a Buddhist kingdom, it would not take long for him to exhaust all his immortal energy, and he would become the prey of others. For example, when Wuqia was chanting an incantation gesture and trying to unleash a thunderbolt to attack someone, there was no natural energy for him to use in this place. Unless he consumed his own energy, he would not be able to unleash even a single spark. Wuqia was suddenly enlightened, and he exclaimed in admiration. This Buddhist kingdom was indeed an interesting place. The era where Wuqia inherited the scroll of stealing began in the primordial era, and lasted for several tens of eons before coming to an abrupt end. The records about Buddhist League in the scroll of stealing were only limited to the era when the ancient Buddhas existed. Therefore, Wuqia was able to recognize the remains of the ancient Buddhas used by Patriarch Miaoying to suppress the formation in the dark abyss of the Northern Ocean. However, when it came to the various techniques used by the Buddhist League cultivators, he did not have a clear understanding of them. It was only after listening to Ao Buzan's explanation that Wuqia truly understood the magical features of the Buddhist kingdom in a palm. With a cold snort, Wuqia waved his hand, and was about to unleash the chaotic energy in his body into heavenly thunderbolts to attack the enemies. But suddenly, countless figures dashed out from the countless monasteries on the mountain. Among the group of people who were charging toward Wuxia on clouds, 300 burly men who stood several tens of feet tall, and clad in golden armors, each with a golden dragon head on their head. Behind these 300 dragon-headed men were more than 1,000,000 mighty monks dressed in kasayas of various colors, and holding white jade staffs in their hands. These monks lined up in a neat phalanx of 10,000 people, shouting the name of Prabhudaratna Buddha at the top of their lungs as they charged toward Wuxia with a ferocious gleam in their eyes. With just a glance, Wuxia could tell that the cultivation base of the 300 dragon-headed men were merely at the level of 30th tier heaven immortal. But, after being enhanced by some unknown force in the Buddhist kingdom, the aura emanating from their bodies was actually close to that of a 5th tier heaven immortal. Among the 1,000,000 monks, many of them had the cultivation base equivalent to the nascent soul realm of immortal cultivators. But after being enhanced by that magical force, the aura emanating from them was no different from that of heaven immortals. Their bodies were shrouded in Buddhist light, making them look like arhats forged from pure gold. Roaring and yelling, they charged straight toward Wuxia. In other words, there were 300 upper-tier heaven immortals, and over 1,000,000 heaven immortals here. The faces of Wuxia and Audiobook turned blue. Although they were bold, and Audiobook still had the cultivation base of a gold immortal, Audiobook, who had just stepped into the gold immortal realm, would never have the courage to fight against over 1,000,000 heaven immortals. Even if they just stood there and let Audiobook kill them, his hands would go limp. And, even if they just let Audiobook devour them without putting up any resistance, Audiobook's stomach would burst because of the 1,000,000 monks. Hastily, Wuxia exercised his chaotic divine eyes and looked at the dragon-headed men and the monks. From every temple on the mountain, a magnificent golden beam of light shot up into the sky, piercing into the heads of these people. Golden halos rippled around these people, forming a set of translucent golden armor that only Wuxia could see with his chaotic divine eyes. These armors were about an inch thick, and inlaid with countless golden swastikas and golden lotus flowers. Each lotus flower had a Buddha standing on it, and all the Buddhas had their hands locked together before their chests. From between their brows, beams of white light shot out, shielding the bodies of these dragon-headed men and monks. It was this armor that had attracted the power of some powerful existences, giving them an overall strength far beyond their own realm. Looking coldly at these people, Wuxia pointed at them and snorted coldly. These people look similar to Wanying Dragon King and the others. Don't tell me they are also the men of dragons? Audiobook cried out in astonishment. Suddenly, 2 beams of bright light shot out from his eyes as he turned to look at those dragon-headed men. After that, Audiobook suddenly broke into a torrent of curses. From some elders of dragons to some clan leaders of some branches of dragons, Audiobook greeted their entire families with all kinds of filthy words, and especially passionately expressed his ardent hope of developing some purely physical relationship with their daughters and granddaughters. They are the men of dragons, but they have abandoned the dragon transformation script and other divine abilities of dragons. What they are cultivating are the divine abilities of Buddhism League. Audiobook trembled with anger. Scums who don't even care about their ancestors are actually cultivating the divine abilities of Buddhism League. While he was speaking, 300 dragon-headed men had arrived before Wuxia. The leading man raised up a Vajra scepter and smashed it down towards Wuxia's head. All evil and heretical cultivators shall bow and convert to the land of Buddha. 300 dragon-headed men roared furiously at the same time. Instinctively, Wuxia punched out and greeted the scepter. Even with the power of Buddhism, the aura of these dragon-headed men was only at the level of 5th tier heaven immortal. Therefore, Wuxia did not take them seriously. A loud boom rang out. Wuxia snorted lightly and retreated hastily. The aura emanated from the dragon-headed man was only at the level of 5th tier heaven immortal, but the strength of his scepter was incredibly strong. Wuxia felt as if 10,000 mountains were falling from the sky. His wrist bones were broken, and even his shoulder was dislocated. Wuxia was pushed back by the force, but the dragon-headed men had already leaped forward. each wielding a Vajra scepter, and smashing it down toward his face. Chapter 669. Wuxia cursed when his wrist was broken. With a twist of his wrist, a stream of purple mist sprayed out of his muscles and quickly repaired the broken bone. On top of that, he was surprised to find that after the broken bones were healed, the texture of the bones around the wounds had become denser, and there was even a faint purple gleam shimmering from them. Wuxia nodded thoughtfully. While he was distracted, the 3 Vajra scepters had already struck his left shoulder, back and waist. The sound of bones breaking rang out like beans being fried, and Wuxia howled in pain. His fleshly body was extremely strong now, and his bones were thousands of times harder than steel. And because his bones were so strong, the pain when they were broken was even greater. Even Wuxia could not bear the excruciating pain. The pain made his vision go black, and he nearly fainted. Fortunately, his divine soul was extremely strong now. After absorbing the soul power of over 100 million evil spirits, and 1/3 of the souls of the living beings on Myriad Immortals' planet, his divine soul was now even stronger than the immortal soul of some gold immortals. Thanks to his strong divine soul, Wuxia would not faint no matter what kind of pain he was enduring. Therefore, he had to bear the excruciating pain with all his might. Beads of sweat kept pouring out from his body, while a large amount of purple mist kept bursting out from his muscles, bone marrow, and blood, quickly healing the broken bones. The newly healed bones were at least 30% stronger than the bones that were just broken. In just the space of a breath, when Wuxia had just finished repairing the broken bones, a dozen Vajra scepters came whistling down with deep, muffled whistling noises. Strengthened by the Buddhist energy, these dragon-headed men, whose cultivation bases were far weaker than Wuxia's, were able to exert a terrifying strength that was comparable to that of a gold immortal. All the Buddhist energy in the entire Buddhist kingdom was surging violently, echoing with these dragon-headed men. The immense power of faith of over 10 million devout believers turned into an invincible torrent and poured into the bodies of these dragon-headed men, turning them into angry Vajras of the Buddhist League and giving them a series of violent beatings. Aobuzan's mouth was twitching with anger. When he heard the sound of bones breaking coming from Wuxia's body, Aobuzan was about to reveal his true form and teach these dragon-headed men a lesson. In Aobuzan's opinion, abandoning the secret cultivation technique of the Dragon Clan and cultivating the divine ability of the Buddhist League was an act of betraying one's own master and ancestors, an act of treason and unfilial. The dragons of the dragon race could eat, drink, and gamble. They could kill and set fires. They could plunder the world. They could go to the graves of their ancestors and dig up their ancestors' corpses and primordial spirits. They could let them shine like the setting sun, and let them contribute to the prosperity and strength of the dragon race with their last bit of energy. But instead of cultivating the martial arts of the dragons, they chose to cultivate the divine ability of the bald donkeys of the Buddhist League. These dragon-headed men had given up their identity as the dragons. This was something that Aobuzan could never tolerate. He wanted to teach them a lesson. No, he wanted to kill all these dragon-headed men, then kill all the bald donkeys who controlled them from behind, and turn all their female relatives into his bed companions. A dense black light burst out of Aobuzan's body. Aobuzan was about to lash out in anger, but Wuxia pressed down on Aobuzan's body and told him not to move. Dozens of Vajra pestles struck Wuxia's body, breaking more than a dozen of his bones, and shattering them in several places. But under the constant nourishment of the purple mist, his broken bones were reconnected, and shattered bones were reformed. The new bones were a few times stronger than the original ones, and the speed of cultivation was at least dozens of times faster than if he cultivated on his own. Wuxia had reached the bottleneck, and it would take him a great deal of effort to make any progress. Now that he had such a convenient way to improve his strength, how could he let Aobuzan mess things up? Enduring the pain, Wuxia spread his arms and cursed Prabhudaratna Buddha. From Prabhudaratna Buddha's mother and father, to his grandchildren, to his master's wife, Wuxia cursed all of them with the most vicious language. His words were vicious and obscene. These dragon-headed men, who had been guarding the Buddhist kingdom for thousands, or even tens of thousands of years, exploded like a bomb. Ignoring the question of whether Prabhudaratna Buddha had a wife or not, 300 dragon-headed men surrounded Wuxia, raised their pestles, and began to beat him violently. These dragon-headed men were infuriated. They did not say any empty words such as the sea of bitterness is boundless, repent and be saved, nor did they say any slogans such as the Buddha is destined to save the world. Instead, they just surrounded Wuxia and beat him. Wuqi's finger bones, wrist bones, arm bones, shoulder blades, ribs, neck bones, spine bones, skull bones, pelvis bones, thigh bones, knee bones, calf bones, ankle bones, soles bones, and toes bones were all crushed. But a large amount of purple mist was rushing out of his muscles, blood, bone marrow, and meridians. With the nourishment of the purple mist, it only took the time of a single breath for his bones to be repaired, and the hardness and flexibility of his bones had been greatly improved. At first, when the scepter struck Wuxia, it produced a series of clanking noises like steel smashing tofu, followed by a series of clanking noises like steel smashing a tree trunk, and then a series of clanking noises like steel smashing a rock. 2 hours later, when the scepter struck Wuxia, a series of clanking noises could be heard. At first, when these dragon-headed men hit Wuxia with all their strength, Wuxia would be knocked hundreds of feet away, and then he would be smashed away by another pestle. But, as the sound of bones breaking changed, the distance Wuxia could fly after each hit became shorter and shorter. By the time his bones collided with the scepter and produced a deafening clang of metal, he was able to stand firmly in a lotus flower, spreading his arms and legs to allow the dragon-headed men to attack him at will. Wuxia stood there like a mountain. 300 pestles smashed on his body with dazzling golden beams, but they could only make his body sway and not fly away like before. Every strike could still cause countless cracks to appear on his bones, but they could no longer break his bones, nor could they shatter his bones. 1,000,000 monks stood in a circle in a distance, staring at Wuxia in terror, wondering where this monster came from. He was so tough that he could withstand the crazy attacks from the 308 groups of dragons guarding this Buddhist kingdom. Time ticked by, and soon another 4 hours had passed. The 300 dragon-headed men were panting and sweating profusely. They finally realized that something was wrong. Every time they struck, Wuqi's body did not move at all. Instead, their palms were aching and swollen. Sparks flew in all directions from the pestles, and with each strike, the pestles bounced high up into the air. But Wuqi's body just swayed gently, and the sound of bones breaking could no longer be heard. The tallest dragon-headed man threw his head back and let out a furious dragon roar. The fiend flame rises high, and the power of the Buddha is boundless. Prabhudaratna Buddha, please send down the boundless power of the Buddha to subdue the demon and slay the fiend. Buddha is merciful and will purge you evildoer. As the dragon-headed man gave a long cry, the 1,000,000 monks sat cross-legged in midair, threw away their white jade staffs, put their palms together, and began chanting the Buddhist scriptures while Chi-Chi put his palms together. One after another, a large number of monks clad in kasayas flew up from countless temples on the mountain. Suddenly, tens of thousands of caves opened up on the mountain, from which walked out countless devout believers clad in monk robes. More than 30 million believers were chanting the Buddhist scriptures at the same time, and a tremendous amount of power of faith towered into the sky. 90% of the power of faith was absorbed by the 108 white beams in the sky, while the remaining 10% shot down from the sky and injected into the bodies of the 300 dragon-headed men. Their tens of feet tall bodies gradually shrunk, and their skin turned golden and shiny as if they were cast from pure gold. When their bodies shrunk to the same height as an ordinary human being, they wielded their pestles, which were also much smaller, but shone even more dazzlingly, and were now covered with a layer of pale golden flame, and thrust them towards Wuxia. The 300 men were divided into more than 30 teams, circling around Wuxia like a windmill. One after another, they spun around Wuqi's body and smashed their pestles towards Wuqi's body. The noise that sounded like steel hitting would echoed out once again. Once again, Wuqi's bones, muscles, and tendons were shattered inch by the pestles. An even more intense pain came from Wuqi's body. Wuxia roared furiously and stood where he was, not moving an inch. The enormous chaotic energy in his body was spinning rapidly, quickly assimilating with the purple mist that spurted out from his muscles. Every 10 portions of chaotic energy could be assimilated into 1 portion of purple mist. Dense purple mist filled his entire body. Wuqi chuckled, opened his mouth, and began to devour the Buddhist power around him. Not only the Buddhist power, Wuqi was even fighting with these dragon-headed men for the power of faith that poured down from the sky. The 7 foundation elevating technique specialized in cultivating chaotic energy. With its special characteristics, any kind of power, any kind of physical existence, could be absorbed by chaotic energy. A small interstitial world had formed inside Wuqi's body. Therefore, his ability to absorb and plunder natural energy was at least 10,000 times stronger than these dragon-headed men. Under Wuqi's efforts, with Wuqi as the core, the Buddhist power and the power of faith in the Buddhist kingdom gradually transformed into a giant golden whirlpool, quickly injecting into Wuqi's body. Catalyzed by the small interstitial world, the pure chaotic energy flowed through Wuqi's body, then quickly assimilated into purple mist, rushing towards the injured parts of Wuqi's body. Smashed, repaired, smashed again, repaired again. Wuqi howled in pain, but at the same time, he howled in pleasure. With the cooperation of these 300 conscientious dragon-headed men, Wuqi's physical strength had once again improved to a great extent. Using brute force to break the bottleneck, Wuqi's eyes gradually shone with a bright light that no one dared to look directly at. His overall strength was growing bit by bit, and a bright light shone in front of his eyes. Under the guidance of the 7 foundation elevating technique, the Song of Gale, the Dark Een Water Scripture, the Inferno Hellfiend Scripture, the True Body of Heaven and Earth Scripture, the Dragon Transformation Script, and the other cultivation techniques transformed into torrents and quickly flowed across Wuqi's mind. The bright light before his eyes expanded rapidly. Wuqi felt that his entire body was enveloped in an incredibly bright light. The strong light shone out from his body, through every pore on his body, and spread out in all directions. Large pieces of dead skin fell off from his skin, while large clouds of filthy black smoke rose from the top of his head. Amidst the putrid black smoke, there was a faint trace of a strange fragrance. Chuckling, Wuqi suddenly laughed out loud and said, "I am indeed destined to meet you Buddhists." Amidst his wild laughter, ink-black divine flame burst out of Wuqi's eyes and rose into the sky like 2 ferocious poisonous dragons. Within a blink of an eye, the flame had burned through the void and left a giant hole in the sky of this Buddhist kingdom, over 1,000 miles in diameter. A faint light shone in from the outside, as Wuqi, who had made a great improvement in his cultivation base, burned through the space barrier of this Buddhist kingdom. Chapter 670. Wanying Dragon King. No Aoguang, the Dragon King of the East Sea, was hiding amidst the watery mist, with a few old dragons, Lord Xianxing, Catfish Flood Dragon, and a group of mountain spirits and water demons from Myriad Immortals planet, watching the battle on a distant cape with a frown on his face. The dark shell 8-direction immovable formation had been broken into pieces by Ming Li, and a few flying ships were forcibly pulled out from the green turtle shell. The soldiers on the ships were knocked unconscious by Ming Li's Sanskrit chanting, which sounded like a loud bell. The flying boat slowly floated in the air, drifting along with the wind. Monk Ming Li laughed strangely as he swung his wooden fish and wooden fish hammer, with all his might to attack the formation that was barely formed by the few remaining flying ships. Loud booms reverberated in the sky, and a rain of light splattered in all directions. Auspicious lights shone in all directions. The East Sea Dragon King, who was conferred by Wuqi, frowned. He was hesitating whether he should bring his underlings to rescue Huang Liang and the others. After all, Huang Liang and the 10,000 soldiers were deployed in East Sea County, the military force directly under Wuqi's command. But these dragon kings and water demons were all demon cultivators, and Yu and Myriad Immortal Alliance were engaged in a life-and-death battle with each other. If anyone knew that there was a group of demon cultivators hiding in East Sea County, it would not be a good thing for Wuqi. While he was hesitating, the dark armor 8-directional immovable formation that was formed by the few remaining ships was finally broken by Ming Li. After a few hours, even the wooden fish that was made of pure gold was full of dents and dents. Monk Ming Li finally broke through the formation and tore the 12 flying boats apart. The long bronze chains were broken and dragged randomly on both sides of the flying boat. They looked like the whiskers of a dead fish hanging down, giving off a lifeless feeling. Tens of thousands of soldiers and dozens of oracles were knocked unconscious by Ming Li's chanting. And the only person who was conscious on the ships now was Huang Liang, the former acting military minister of Hai Province, now the leading general of East Sea County, and also Wuqi's messenger or adjutant. Huang Liang, a timid, lecherous, greedy and sophisticated man, stood trembling on the prow of the flying ship with a long knife in his hand. Looking at Ming Li, who was hovering in front of him on a white cloud, he felt his lower abdomen clench and a strong urge to urinate. He clenched his legs tightly around the piece of meat between them, trying his best not to make a fool of himself on the spot. Forcing himself to calm down, Huang Liang howled in a hoarse voice as he stared at Ming Li. Do you general? Ming Li smiled warmly. He placed the wooden fish and the wooden fish hammer on the prow of the ship, then gently pressed his hands on Huang Liang's shoulders and said, "The Buddha is merciful. My hands have never been stained with blood, so how can it be considered as attacking you? I'm just preaching, looking for the fated ones, and helping all living beings to release their souls from purgatory. This is a good deed to accumulate great virtues." A Buddhist light that looked like a colored glaze slowly flowed down from Huang Liang's shoulders to his entire body. Ming Li smiled warmly at Huang Liang, and there was an indescribable sense of benevolence in his eyes and brows. Huang Liang's body was twitching. He felt as if he had returned to his mother's womb, feeling peaceful and carefree. He felt that this Ming Li before him was the closest person to him, and that he should obey all of Ming Li's orders. Huang Liang was so close to reciting the name of Buddha along with Ming Li, but suddenly, Wu Qi's face appeared before Huang Liang's eyes. He suddenly thought of all the cruel and merciless things that Wu Qi had done, and recalled Wu Qi's resolute and merciless methods. Huang Liang shuddered. Suddenly, the long saber in his hand thrust out like a gust of wind, aiming straight at Ming Li's lower abdomen. Seeing that Huang Liang was about to fall into his trap and become his most loyal follower, Ming Li nodded with a smile on his face. The vigilance in his heart had been reduced by 99%. Suddenly, Huang Liang launched an attack. The blade of his saber had pierced 3 centimeters deep into Ming Li's lower abdomen. Only then did Ming Li react. With a furious roar, he quickly retreated and threw a backhand punch at Huang Liang's head. The wind generated by the punch was accompanied by the roar of a heavenly dragon. Ming Li's punch was the Dragon Roar Fist, one of the 18 heavenly dragon demon subduing techniques, one of the 8 groups of heavenly dragons of the Buddhist League. When this punch was cultivated to the limit, it would have the strength of 100 dragons. The power of this divine power was definitely not weaker than the body-tempering techniques of the immortals and the various body-tempering techniques of the human race. It was a divine power of fiend refining that only those guardian arhats with wisdom, aptitude, and perseverance could cultivate. Ming Li's cultivation base was not that high, but his punch also had the strength of 3 dragons, which was enough to shatter the body of an ordinary heaven immortal. With his cultivation base, Huang Liang could at most have the strength of 1 dragon of a heavenly dragon. When he encountered Ming Li's punch, he would be smashed to pieces. But intimidated by Wu Qi's ferocious power, Huang Liang suddenly had the thought of risking his life. The ferocious Huang Liang bared his teeth and glared at Ming Li with his scarlet eyes. He paid no attention to the punch that came smashing down on his face. Instead, he swung his saber with all his strength and continued to thrust it toward Ming Li's lower abdomen. A vast amount of purple mist kept rushing into Huang Liang's body. Huang Liang's blood was boiling, his internal organs were trembling, and his muscles and bones were filled with a ferocious heat unique to a desperate man. At that moment, Huang Liang had forgotten about life and death, about wealth and honor, about the fact that he was actually a cowardly and slippery man, about the dozens of beautiful girls he had hidden in his backyard, and about the large amount of gold, silver, and jewelry he had stored in his underground storeroom, and about the terrible scene where he might be beaten to a pulp. He just clenched his teeth and concentrated all of his spirit, energy, and spirit on the blade. All of his blood and chi were sucked out and injected into the long blade in his hand. In that instant, Huang Liang's body suddenly turned into a black hole, and all the purple mist on Pangu continent rushed toward him. In the blink of an eye, at least 100 times more purple mist than Huang Liang had ever absorbed in his life had fused into his body, quickly fusing with every cell in his body. A jarring cracking sound rang out from Huang Liang's body. His cultivation base, which had stagnated for at least 10 years, soared 100 times in that instant, from the equivalent of a 35th tier heaven immortal to a 27th tier heaven immortal. In other words, Huang Liang had risen from the realm of 1 star of the first Pangu heaven to the realm of 3 stars. All of a sudden, the blade became hazy, and only a shadow could be seen, stabbing into Ming Li's lower abdomen without making a sound. The 1.5-foot-long blade sank into Ming Li's body. Pale golden blood sprayed out along the grooves in the blade, and a faint whistling sound of the wind could be heard. In just a blink of an eye, at least a dozen kilograms of blood sprayed out. A muffled boom rang out as Ming Li's dragon roar fist landed squarely on Huang Liang's face. Huang Liang's nose collapsed, and blood sprayed out of the wound. The terrible force of the fist knocked Huang Liang's head back, breaking his neck into a dozen pieces, and breaking all the nerves and blood vessels in his neck by the terrible force. Huang Liang's vision turned dark, and he lost all consciousness. But a vast amount of purple mist was constantly fusing into his body. His broken nerves, blood vessels, and bones were healing rapidly, and they were now several times tougher than before. Huang Liang's eyes suddenly lit up, and a boundless killing intent rushed up from his heart. Gripping the hilt of the blade, he gave it a hard twist, then slashed it down. A cracking sound was heard, and Ming Li let out a miserable howl. Huang Liang had cut his chest open, and all the bits and pieces of bezoar and horse jewels in his lower abdomen sprayed out. Hee hee, Lao Tzu is finally a man today. The blood splashed all over Huang Liang's face. He gritted his teeth and roared, "Bald donkey, Lao Tzu is finally a man today." With his face covered in blood, Huang Liang howled like a wounded wild wolf. He dropped the blade, curled up his body, and threw himself at Ming Li, opening his bloody mouth and biting the monk's neck. His white teeth clenched, and a loud crack rang out as the arteries in Ming Li's neck were broken by Huang Liang's bite. A copious amount of blood sprayed out, and was sucked into Huang Liang's mouth. Ming Li shrieked in pain. He was a 9th-tier gold arhat, and one of the most favored disciples of Prabhudaratna Buddha. That was why he was appointed as the missionary disciple of Prabhudaratna Buddha's lineage on Pangu continent. In his opinion, it was a piece of cake to deal with the officials and army of Diyu in Hai Province. But he never dreamed that he would be defeated by an insignificant ant like Huang Liang. He felt a sharp pain, and blood kept spraying out of his mouth. Every drop of blood contained an extremely powerful Buddhist power. Every drop of blood was condensed by monk Ming Li, who had painstakingly refined the Arhat golden body with a huge amount of faith power, and his own Buddhist power. Blood was gushing out of his broken stomach and his arteries. As the blood gushed out, Ming Li felt his vision darken and his body go limp. Howling at the top of his lungs, Ming Li was thrown into disorder. He kept punching Huang Liang's body with both fists, breaking his bones inch by inch, and smashing his internal organs into meat paste. Huang Liang's body was so badly mutilated that he looked like a broken meat sack. But this was the most terrifying characteristic of human warriors. Unless their souls were destroyed and their heads were cut off, it was extremely difficult to kill them as long as they were on Pangu continent. Huang Liang's battered body was crazily absorbing the purple mist that kept pouring over. His body was broken and repaired, broken and healed. No matter how Ming Li beat him, he could not really kill him. Ming Li was also in a panic. With his cultivation base and divine abilities, he could shatter Huang Liang's soul with a casual chant, and tear Huang Liang's head off with a casual palm strike. As long as he struck, he could kill Huang Liang completely. But Ming Li had forgotten how to deal with human warriors. Instead, he began to compete with Huang Liang with brute force. The two of them tangled together like two mad wild dogs. Huang Liang was scratching, tearing, and gnawing at Ming Li's body, while Ming Li was hitting, hammering, and biting at Huang Liang's body. Both of them let out hysterical howls as blood and minced flesh kept spraying out from their bodies. It was a hideous scene. All of a sudden, a plume of black flame burst out of the void, accompanied by a dragon roar. Wuqi leaped out of the burned void with a strange laugh. As soon as he leaped out of the Buddhist kingdom, Wuqi sensed that Huang Liang's aura had suddenly become 100 times stronger. He turned to look at Huang Liang in amazement, and could not help but give him a thumbs up. This guy is a real man today. Aobuzin, who was still gnawing on a human leg, also looked at Huang Liang in surprise. Half of the leg had fallen out of his wide-open mouth. Chapter 671. Sure enough, the divine flame of void had the miraculous effect of burning everything in the void. As soon as the black flame appeared, it burned a large hole in the Buddhist kingdom, causing all the restrictive spells of the Buddhist League to lose their effectiveness. The rich Buddhist power leaked out in an instant, and the 300 dragon-headed men and 1 million monks, who were arrogant a moment ago, felt their bodies go limp at the same time. Their cultivation bases dropped abruptly, and it was as if a dragon had turned into a caterpillar. Wuqi snorted coldly and sprayed out the chaotic light again. A great sheet of light enveloped the entire Buddhist kingdom. The dragon-headed men, the monks, the Buddhist cultivators in Kasayas, and the tens of millions of devout believers were all sucked into Wuqi's interstitial world and suppressed. Aobuzin was sharp-eyed and quick-witted. From among the countless believers, he picked a few fair-skinned and handsome men and women and swallowed them in one gulp, chewing them with great relish. The bodies of these believers were almost made of flesh and blood, but they were condensed from the power of faith and the power of the Buddhist League. In Aobuzin's words, the bodies of these believers were fragrant, crisp and tender, without the slightest fishy smell, and even their bones were crisp and fragrant like lotus roots. They were the best meat dishes in the world. In Aobuzin's era, when the great figures among the evil immortals held banquets to entertain their guests, they would be too embarrassed to send invitations to their relatives and friends if they did not serve a few believers of the Buddhist kingdom, and some dishes cooked by golden arhats. In some secret corners of outer heavenly realms, in the black markets run by the evil immortals, some butchers sold these Buddhist believers as the best meat dishes. Who told these believers in the Buddhist kingdom to have such a fragrant body without a trace of impurities? Moreover, there was powerful spirit chi and soul power contained in them. Only the flesh of those powerful immortal beasts could compare to them. Aobuzin's words made Wuqi's eyes shine. It seemed that he had gained a lot this time. Mingli had dragged him into the Buddhist kingdom and suppressed him, but in the end he had given him a great benefit. The chaotic light kept spraying out, and soon, the mountain with a circumference of 100,000 miles was dragged into Wuqi's interstitial world. Even the boundless clear water and lotus leaves were swallowed by Wuqi. They were quickly digested by the chaotic energy and replenished into Wuqi's interstitial world. What made Wuqi happy was that in the temple at the highest point of the mountain, he actually found 8 volumes of Buddhist scriptures, which recorded many good Buddhist cultivation methods, from the most ordinary little monk all the way to the first-grade golden arhat, and even how to condense the bodhisattva lotus throne from the first-grade golden arhat, and how to achieve bodhisattva karma. It was just that the techniques above the bodhisattva realm were missing. This was to be expected. Monk Mingli's own cultivation was not high. He was now only at the level of a 9th-grade golden arhat. What was the use of the manuals above the bodhisattva realm? After scanning the 8 volumes of Buddhist scriptures with his divine sense and memorizing all the Buddhist mystic techniques, Wuqi threw them into his interstitial world. Good, very good. Wuqi was overjoyed. With these cultivation methods, he could use the mystic technique of the 7 foundation elevating technique, catalyze the Buddhist energy with chaotic energy, and cultivate all kinds of Buddhist divine abilities. At that time he could pretend to be a Buddhist cultivator again. After letting out 3 loud laughs, Wuqi looted the Buddhist kingdom, and put the 108 sariras in the air into his interstitial world, slowly refining them. After that, the divine flame of sky burned through the void, and he flew out with Aobuzin, who was holding a human leg in his mouth. As soon as he returned to the shore of the ocean, Wuqi saw Huang Liang entangled with Mingli like a wild beast. Like 2 wild beasts who had lost their minds, they were fighting each other until their flesh was badly mangled. The situation was extremely tragic. Mingli, whose overall strength was obviously thousands of times stronger than Huang Liang, was actually suppressed by Huang Liang. Both of them were entangled in an adulterous relationship, sweating profusely, and cursing each other. Wuqi could not help but give Huang Liang a thumbs up and praise him for his bravery. In the distance, Lord Xianxing transmitted his voice to Wuqi, telling him about Huang Liang's performance just now. He told Wuqi everything, including how Huang Liang ordered the Dark Armor 8 directional immovable formation to defend against the enemy, and how he did not abandon the soldiers and flee alone, but resolutely attacked Ming Li after the formation was breached by Ming Li. Wuqi could not help but keep nodding. Huang Liang's performance today was really good. Seeing Huang Liang bite Ming Li's nose and poke his middle fingers into the monk's ears, Wuqi strode over and gave Ming Li a heavy kick on his ribs. Although Wuqi was beaten up by the 300 dragon-headed men in the Buddhist kingdom, he had obtained a great benefit. His physical strength had now been enhanced to a level that was beyond common sense. With the kick, half of Ming Li's ribs were shattered. Grabbing Ming Li's neck, Wuqi pressed down on Huang Liang, who had gone mad, and ordered him to stand aside. Ming Li roared furiously, struggling and cursing crazily. But Wuqi grabbed the tendon on his neck with 2 fingers and squeezed it hard. Immediately, the monk became limp like a dead snake, unable to move anymore. Like a gust of wind, Wuqi thrust out 360 immortal detaining needles, locking all the vital acupoints on Ming Li's body. After that, he pressed his right palm on Ming Li's head and uttered a spell, forming 3 layers of soul-restraining restrictive spells, blocking off Ming Li's last path of escaping with the relic. Huang Liang, who was beaten senseless and had forgotten where he was, howled and tried to pounce on Ming Li again. But Wuqi's shout woke Huang Liang up. Huang Liang's body was covered in blood, his fingernails were filled with minced meat, his mouth was filled with blood and flesh, and 2 tendons were stuck between his teeth. Only now did he regain his senses. He staggered a few steps backward, and sat down on the prow of the flying ship. Laughing foolishly, Huang Liang stared at Wuqi and said, "Your Excellency, I'm not dead?" Wuqi gave Huang Liang a deep look, nodded and said, "You're not dead. You've done a good job this time. When we get back, I'll reward you with more gold, silver, jewelry, and beautiful girls." After a short pause, Wuqi threw Ming Li onto the deck and said coolly, "You've done a really good job this time. I'll put you in an important position in the future. Keep your spirits up, for you still have a lot of things to do in the future." Gold, silver, jewelry, and beautiful girls were Huang Liang's favorite things, but when he heard Wuqi say that he would put him in an important position, Huang Liang's eyes lit up. He knew very well that he was not Wuqi's trusted subordinate, and the person Wuqi trusted the most had always been someone else. Ever since he came to East Sea County, Huang Liang had always felt that there was a thick layer of darkness in East Sea County, and he was trapped in the darkness, unable to figure out Wuqi's background. Now Wuqi was going to put him in an important position. Huang Liang rose to his feet, dropped to his knees and swore to Wuqi, "I'll assist you with all my heart, Your Excellency. Please rest assured, Your Excellency, I'll be loyal to you in the future." Looking at Huang Liang's behavior, Wuqi smiled, then gave Ming Li a heavy kick on his face. "Bald donkey, why did you come to East Sea County to pick a fight?" Wuqi snapped angrily. "The U is so big, why did you come to East Sea County instead of going somewhere else?" Ming Li stared blankly at Wuqi, then suddenly cried out in a hoarse voice, You destroyed my Buddhist kingdom in the palm? How is that possible? That's the Buddhist kingdom my master crafted for me. Without the cultivation base of a bodhisattva, how could I destroy it? Could it be that you? Was it the Buddhist kingdom in the palm that monk Ming Li's master crafted for him? Wuqi nodded to himself. No wonder the atmosphere and scale of the Buddhist kingdom were not at the level of Ming Li, a 9th stage arhat. It was just that everything in the Buddhist kingdom had been plundered by Wuqi, and the Buddhist kingdom had been completely destroyed. After pondering for a moment, Wuqi ordered Huang Liang to return to the East Sea City. He transferred thousands of soldiers and sent those who had been knocked unconscious by the Buddhist chants back to the barracks to recuperate. Then he drove 12 flying ships back to the East Sea City, and then transferred the torturers under Luo Kadi to torture Ming Li. Luo Kadi was a patient, ruthless, and merciless person. During his years under Lu Qingfeng's command, he gradually took charge of the assassins raised by Lu Qingfeng, as well as the dark forces such as lynchings and prisons. Because of his character, he was surrounded by a group of cold-blooded, merciless, and even mentally twisted torture experts. Less than an hour after Wu Qi handed Ming Li over to them, Ming Li, who had been tortured to the point of no longer looking human, completely confessed everything. Ming Li's master was one of the 8 bodhisattvas under Prabhudaratna Buddha, the 7 treasures Golden Bodhisattva Bodhisattva. Prabhudaratna Buddha was famous for forging all kinds of Buddhist artifacts in the Buddhist League, and was a top refining grandmaster in the Buddhist League. Among the 8 personal disciples of Prabhudaratna Buddha, Bodhisattva Bodhisattva, the 7 treasures Golden Bodhisattva Bodhisattva. It was thanks to his master that Ming Li was able to form the Buddhist kingdom in his palm with the cultivation base of a 9th-tier Arhat. During the war between Myriad Immortal Alliance and Yu Dynasty, the Buddhist League had taken the opportunity to sneak into Pangu continent to recruit believers and expand their territory. Apart from Buddha of Joy, who was behind Madman Xue, the other 7 Buddhas had also sent their emissaries. Prabhudaratna Buddha and Delightful Buddha of Prabhudaratna Buddha were not on good terms with each other in the Buddhist League. Their disciples often had disputes and fights. Therefore, when Madman Xue was preaching in Zhong province, Ming Li also came here eagerly. It was because Madman Xue was preaching in the central province, and he had achieved great results in the past year. Therefore, monk Ming Li purposely came here to undermine Madman Xue's plan. Upon hearing Ming Li's confession, Wu Qi felt a lump in his throat. What does the internal strife of the Buddhist League have to do with Wu Qi's East Sea County? Why did you, a scourge, come here? Ming Li had suffered a great loss in East Sea County, and his Buddhist kingdom in Appam had been destroyed. His master, Bodhisattva Bodhisattva, must have sensed it. The fact that the Buddhist League had sent the disciples of 8 Buddhas to preach on Pangu continent should be related to some big plans of the Buddhist League. Perhaps what happened to Ming Li would directly alert Prabhudaratna Buddha, and perhaps one of the Buddhas would sneak into Pangu continent to stand up for his disciples. You're not called a pockmark, you're a fucking scammer. Wu Qi's scalp went numb at the thought of the possible consequences if he were to teach Ming Li a lesson. After pondering for a long time, Wu Qi gritted his teeth. In for a penny, in for a pound. I might as well play with you. Would the Buddhist League dare to openly clash with the officials of the Yu dynasty on Pangu continent? If Ming Li dares to do so, would Prabhudaratna Buddha, a Buddha of the Buddhist League, whose every word and deed represents the opinion of the Buddhist League, dare to get involved in this muddy water as well? After beheading Ming Li and letting Ao Buzan devour his relic, Wu Qi carried the bloody head and led an army of 10,000 soldiers to the field headquarters, where Bo Yenting's army was located. Wu Qi was going to join the war again, and at the same time, he was going to put the blame on Ming Li's head. The Buddhist League is interfering in the conflict between Myriad Immortal Alliance and the Yu dynasty. Chapter 672. On the cloud platform, Bo Yenting's tent stood majestically. Dozens of huge airboats were approaching from afar, carrying mountainous amounts of grains, fresh meats, fine wines, medicaments, and other supplies. 3 airboats were carrying 7,000 retired veterans who had just been re-enlisted and armed. On a towering peak to the south of the cloud platform, a large sheet of fog had blanketed the land for 10,000 miles around. Vaguely, deafening battle cries and the deep beating of war drums could be heard coming out of the fog. Above the fog, thousands of oracles were chanting spells and performing incantation gestures to disperse the fog. Some of them were surveying the nearby underground energy veins, digging ditches to remove the natural energy supply from the underground energy veins, cutting off the natural energy supply to the formation near the peak. But the biggest threat to the formation was the 9 red fireballs, each about 100 miles in diameter, hovering high in the sky. Inside the fireballs, which were rolling and emitting threatening heat waves, huge figures that stood tens of miles tall could be vaguely seen. These figures all had 3 heads and 6 arms, but each of them had 3 long legs, each standing on a 9-headed fiery serpent. These hazy figures were singing in a deep voice, and a terrible heat was pouring out of their bodies to form the 9 mighty little suns. Under the control of the 9 huge figures, countless fireballs condensed into about 10 feet thick fire arrows and shot down from the sky. Like raindrops, the fire arrows twisted the air and fell from the sky, dragging a faint light that could be seen with naked eyes. Once they hit the fog formation, the fog within a radius of several miles was immediately evaporated, revealing the mountains and rivers that had been dried up and cracked by the fire. Every now and then, the 9 huge figures would grumble in a deep voice. In front of Bo Yenting's main camp on Cloud Platform, oracles from the Directorate of Celestials were slaughtering captive immortals and oracles on 9 altars, each measuring about 1,000 feet in circumference. Blood essence and souls were constantly being absorbed by the fireballs. Once these fireballs were replenished with blood essence and souls, the intensity and heat of the fireballs suddenly skyrocketed, and the power of the fire arrows they shot out also increased by several times. In the foggy formation, tens of thousands of great Yu soldiers, led by hundreds of golden-armored captains, were fighting a group of immortals with long sleeves. Among the hundreds of golden-armored generals, there were more than 100 who had reached the realm of Second Pangu Heaven, and their cultivation bases were comparable to gold immortals, while a similar number of gold immortals were fighting against them. In addition to the nearly 100 gold immortals, there were also hundreds of heaven immortals, and tens of thousands of itinerant cultivators, such as Nascent Divinity, Nascent Soul, and Jindan cultivators. On the towering peak behind these immortals, a large number of immortals were deploying formations to shroud the void in all directions. The number of immortals and itinerant cultivators near the mountain was even greater than the army led by Bo Yenting. Clearly, this mountain was an important stronghold of Myriad Immortal Alliance. Otherwise, it would not have been guarded by so many gold immortals and heaven immortals, nor so many itinerant cultivators. On the other hand, the foggy formation was able to separate Bo Yenting's army from his vanguard, and no matter how hard the oracles tried to attack it, they could not break it. It showed how extraordinary the formation was. As was common in the battle between the Great Yu army and the immortals, the Yu's soldiers charged forward like a tide, while the immortals unleashed all kinds of magical treasures. All kinds of flying swords, magical treasures, talismans, and thunderbolts came whistling down. Wearing helmets and armors, the soldiers of Yu fought head-on against the magic of the immortals with the protection of the oracles. Every time they charged, a large group of soldiers would be knocked away by the flying swords and magical treasures, and many more would be injured by the immortal talismans and thunderbolts. But their strong fleshly bodies and excellent armors, as well as the magical spells of the oracles, made these soldiers feel no pain, no fear, and no fatigue. Even if their arms were chopped off and their bodies were blown to pieces, as long as they could still move, they would continue to charge forward without fear. The fog eroded the restrictive spells on these Yu soldiers, and as a result, the vanguard army of Zhong province had been trapped in the fog formation for a day and a night, and the restrictive spells on them had begun to weaken. The lingering fog kept seeping into the hazy halo around them, weakening their defenses layer by layer. All of a sudden, a strong light burst out from the restrictive spells on a team of 100 soldiers, and the defensive spells on them were broken by the continuous attacks and the invasion of the fog. Immediately, a dozen ghost immortals, clad in black robes and shrouded in a ghostly aura, rushed out from the crowd of immortals in front of them. Holding white bone banners in their hands, and wearing small copper bells on their little fingers, the immortals in black waved the white bone banners and touched the copper bells with their fingers for a while. Immediately, the howling of ghosts accompanied by the ringing of the copper bells rang out. The captain and his soldiers screamed at the same time. Wisps of white smoke spurted out from their 7 orifices. Then they fell to the ground and lost their breath. The ghost immortals burst out laughing, their laughter sounding like the howls of ghosts and very unpleasant to the ears. The leader, a golden-armored general, who was a 3-stars realm cultivator in the Second Pangu Heaven, flew into a rage. Taking advantage of the moment when these ghost immortals rushed out of the formation, he flashed to their side and thrust his halberd down. The sound of flesh being pierced was ear-piercing. The dozen or so immortals in black did not even have time to scream before their bodies were riddled with at least 70 to 80 see-through holes. Especially the heavy blow between their eyebrows. Even their immortal souls were shattered. Before the golden-armored general could retreat to the army, 3 gold immortals, who were of the same cultivation base as him, came whistling out. 3 sword beams, 1 gold, 1 purple, and 1 red, swept down with cold air and entangled the golden-armored general. Following them were 7 golden purple immortal talismans, each about 12 feet long, and dozens of fist-sized thunderbolts that glinted with a misty white light that looked like sharp thorns. The sword beams hacked on the general's armor, making it clanging noises. 7 spirit talismans sealed off the general's way of retreat. Earth, water, fire, wind, and all sorts of elemental energies swept out, wrapping the general in the air like an oven and burning him in an area with a radius of about 1 mile. The dozens of thunderbolts approached the general like lightning bolts, and then exploded at the same time. The 7 immortal talismans restrained the explosive force of the thunderbolts to a narrow area less than 10 feet around the general, and as a result, the power of the thunderbolts increased by more than 10 times. The general gave a muffled snort as his armor shattered. Suddenly, numerous runes burst out of his battle robe and transformed into a light armor that wrapped around his body. But the light armor was also destroyed by the continuous attacks. The battle robe, densely embroidered with countless runes to form the pattern of mountains and rivers, could only emit a strong light to barely block the attacks from the outside world, while all the attacks fell on the general at the same time. Flesh and blood flew in all directions, while bones and tendons were broken. The general, who was in the 3 stars realm of the second Pangu heaven a moment ago, was now twisted and deformed by the explosion. He retreated hastily, covered in blood. Dayu's battle formation made way for him to flee into the formation. But as soon as he rushed back, he fell to the ground. His left arm was broken, his spine was broken into 3 pieces, and his flesh and blood were torn apart by the shock, causing blood to spurt out of his body. Fortunately, the fleshly body of the human race was countless times stronger than diamond. If an ordinary gold immortal were hit by such an attack, he would have long been reduced to ashes. Even so, the general had lost his ability to move when he rushed back into the battle formation. A few of his bodyguards rushed out and poured a large amount of medicinal liquid and pills into his mouth, then applied ointments all over his body. The joint attack of 3 gold immortals immediately made one of Dayu's generals lose his ability to fight. The morale of the immortals soared. A white-bearded gold immortal, who was presiding over the formation on the mountain behind them, laughed out loud. He kept unleashing thunderbolts from his palms to shake the dozens of flags in front of him, causing the fog formation that covered an area of 10,000 miles to change again. The water vapor in the fog grew denser and denser. As a result, a great deal of green energy began to pour out of the fog. In the blink of an eye, the green energy condensed into wooden stakes that were tens of feet in diameter and about a mile long. The azure spirit chi violently rubbed against the wooden stakes. Immediately, a large expanse of azure lightning sprayed out from the wooden stakes. Deafening thunderclaps resounded, and countless bolts of lightning wrapped around the thousands of wooden stakes bombarded the army's formation. Dozens of Dayu's soldiers who were charging out of the formation were caught off guard by the sudden change. As the huge wooden stakes smashed down, the power of lightning shot out in all directions and knocked several groups of soldiers to the ground. The lightning and fire shattered the restrictive spells and armors they wore, and the soldiers howled miserably as they were burned to ashes by the lightning and fire. Through the deliberate amplification of the formation, the miserable howls of Dayu's soldiers before they died could be heard clearly by the generals and officers of Dayu near the main tent on the cloud platform. Many of the high-ranking generals of Dayu were enraged when they heard that, and some of them rushed into the tent, dropping to their knees and asking for permission to fight. Sitting high up behind the table, Bo Yunting looked coldly at these generals with a gloomy face. The vanguard of 30,000 soldiers has been trapped. Do you still want to send the spoils of war to those rebels? With a cold snort, Bo Yunting clenched his jaws and said, "No one is allowed to lead the army into battle until this formation is cracked. Those who disobey will be punished by military law." Wuxia came to Bo Yunting's main tent with an army of 10,000 soldiers, ready to receive the commander's token and rejoin the battle against Myriad Immortal Alliance. He left the army on the cloud platform and was led into the tent by a few heralds, preparing to report to Bo Yenting that he had recovered from his injury and had returned to the army. Upon hearing Bo Yenting's rebuke, Wuxia glanced at the unsightly faces of the generals who asked for permission to fight, as well as the shrill howls coming out of the fog outside. An idea immediately came to his mind. If one were to say that the formation outside was difficult to break, these generals and soldiers would have a hard time doing so. After all, they did not know much about the formations of the immortals. Even among the oracles of the Directorate of Celestials, very few of them had studied the formations of the immortals. Whether it was the army of Du or the oracles of the Directorate of Celestials, they preferred to destroy everything that stood in their way with tremendous force, just like the 9 huge fireballs that were spewing raging flames in the sky outside. If given enough time, these fiend gods invited from outer heavenly realms could even burn the mountain and the formation to ashes. But they needed time. By the time they broke the formation, the 30,000 soldiers would have long been killed or wounded. Wuxia, on the other hand, could see that the formation outside was riddled with holes. It was nothing more than a combination of 5 maze formations and a thunder formation of 5 elements. According to the diagrams of formations found in the Scroll of Stealing, the level of this formation was the level used by an ordinary mid-tier heaven immortal to protect his cave abode. Rolling his eyes, Wuxia cupped his fist and bowed to Bo Yenting, then asked for permission to fight. Military Minister, I Tanlang, have just recovered from my injury, and I ask for permission to break the formation. After pondering for a brief moment, Wuxia bowed to Bo Yenting again and said, When I was wiping out an itinerant cultivator named Reverend Yao Yu in my territory, I found a scroll containing the formation diagram of the 5 elements nested thunder maze formation outside. I have full confidence in breaking it. Bo Yenting was taken aback. Then he jumped to his feet in ecstasy and burst into laughter. Good. If you can really break the formation and kill these rebels, I'll give you a great merit, and I'll personally ask for a reward for you. Wuxia narrowed his eyes and agreed without hesitation. Chapter 673. While Wuxia volunteered to attack the alliance of 10,000 Immortals formation in Bo Yenting's headquarters, Princess Zhonglu was busy in Anlu County. In the mountains 3,000 miles southwest of Anhe City, several mountaintops were moved away by Han Fei with the mountain drinking technique. Standing on the white cloud, Han Fei, who was clad in a linen robe unique to Du, gave a light cry. Immediately, the 8 mountains that were tightly clustered together slowly wriggled in 8 directions like mollusks that had come to life, revealing a flat land with a circumference of 100 miles. Each of the 8 mountains was over 100,000 feet tall. Following Han Fei's order, they slowly protected the flat land according to the position of the 8 trigrams. At the same time, the surrounding mountains and valleys gradually changed their topography. Vaguely, there were 360 mountains surrounding the 8 trigrams formation formed by the 8 mountains according to the position of the stars in the sky. As the mountains wriggled, they gradually changed their positions, but everything was done silently. Although they were moving, they did not make any sound. When Han Fei performed the mountain drinking technique, it gave people a sense of tranquility and gentleness. Even the insects on the mountain didn't sense the changes in the mountain. They were still happy and unfettered in their own little world. When Han Fei moved the mountains away, Sun Kuang stepped on a white cloud and flew over the flat land. With a pale purple jade scroll in his hand, he murmured a few incantations in a low voice, and the earth veins under the mountains quickly rushed toward the flat land. 360 huge spirit veins were roaring underground like giant dragons. Soon they were connected to the roots of the 360 mountains in the periphery. When these energy veins were perfectly fused with the mountains under Sun Kuang's great power, the 360 mountains slowly released energy that was 100 times more abundant than before. The flowers, birds, insects, fishes, and all the other creatures on and off the mountains all cheered. Su Qin, who was an expert in the art of stars, flew up into the sky with a smile, until he reached the highest altitude he could reach. He formed a seal with both hands and carefully drew down the power of the stars from the 9 heavens, turning it into an endless silver rain that sprinkled down. The 360 towering mountains were connected to the power of the stars in the sky. Instantly, these mountains were all shrouded in starlight, and a layer of dense purple mist and silver light covered these mountains like flowing water. Princess Zhonglu was riding on a 5-colored cloud, flying across mountains. Wherever she passed, the rocks, sand, and dust in the mountains were all refined by the 5-colored divine flame. The originally messy mountains were refined by the divine flame, turning into a pure, glass-like texture. Princess Zhongli's powerful divine sense penetrated into these mountains, directly pulling out the rare metals within the mountains, and outlined countless nested rune array discs within the mountains. After Princess Zhongli flew past these seemingly ordinary mountains, they immediately gave off a completely different feeling. Originally, these mountains were just ordinary mountains, but now at a glance, they looked like bonsai carved out of supreme-grade jade. A strong and vigorous aura spread faintly, and these mountains had been fundamentally changed. The rune array discs within the 360 mountains were connected to each other, and the 360 huge energy veins were intertwined and fused together. A mighty formation was slowly taking shape under the joint efforts of everyone. But this was not the end of the formation. The real killer move of the formation was in the 8 mountains that stood tens of thousands of feet tall in the center. When the 360 mountains in the periphery were ready, they worked together to extract 8 huge immortal veins from the depths of Pangu continent and fused them into the 8 mountains. The 8 immortal veins stretched for hundreds of millions of miles and were the origin of 1/3 of the energy veins in Zhong province. When they were forcibly joined together, the 8 mountains in the center immediately emitted a dazzling light. The impurities in the mountains were washed away in an instant, leaving behind a pure texture that looked like pearls and jade. Fortunately, Yandan was sitting in the sky and had concealed the situation in this part of the mountain range with the disk of heavenly Tao transmigration. Otherwise, when the 8 mountains emitted the towering light, they would look like 8 huge lighthouses, and would have been discovered long ago. Fortunately, Wuxia had controlled the item spirit in the Panga's map, so no one could find out any changes in the energy veins in Zhong province without his consent. Otherwise, the sudden change in the origin of 1/3 of the energy veins in Zhong province would immediately attract the army of Zhong province. Su Qin struck again in the sky. This time he did not attract the light of the stars, but the terrible true flame of the sun. The pale red true flame of the sun, which looked like melted glass, sprinkled down silently from the sky and merged with the 8 mountains. The mountains melted, and the rolling magma slowly slid down the steep slopes that Han Fei had created on purpose, forming a lava lake with a circumference of 100 miles on the flat ground between the 8 mountains. Carefully he controlled the mountains around him. For every inch the 8 mountains melted, he would make the mountains rise by 1 foot. For every foot the mountains melted, he would make the mountains rise by 10 feet. After 1 day and 1 night, the 8 mountains were melted thousands of feet high, but the mountains had risen to 18,000 feet high. Nourished by the rich immortal energy in the underground immortal veins and tempered by the true flame of the sun, the 8 mountains had become 10,000 times harder than diamonds, and 10,000 times more delicate and beautiful than jade. Princess Zhongli stood in the middle of the lava lake, with the 5-colored divine ray sweeping out from her back like 5 flood dragons, carving countless runes and spells on the inside and outside of the 8 mountains. Little Kair stood on Princess Zhongli's shoulder, flapping her wings excitedly and spraying out balls of Nanming flame. The true flame of the sun and Nanming flame merged into one, and under Little Kair's control, they turned into a brand new innate divine flame, which possessed an extremely magical power and an incredible power. Only the Phoenix clan could control fire like this. It was an innate ability of these divine birds, just like how the Great Gale could control the storms between the heaven and earth. The flames on the 8 mountains were restrained, condensing into a huge fireball with a diameter of tens of miles in the belly of each mountain. Boundless immortal chi kept fusing into the 8 fireballs, gradually increasing the power of the 8 fireballs. Because of the countless runes and spells carved by Princess Zhonglu, not even the slightest flame could leak out from the 8 mountains. After Jingku and the other captains brought many disciples of Mo sect and planted a large amount of flowers, plants, and trees on the mountains, The 8 mountains were once again filled with greenery and vitality. High up in the sky, Sun Quan and a few other Grandmaster experts joined hands and exerted their power once again. 81 energy veins of pure fire element were forcibly drawn over from afar and fused into the ground of the lava lake, forcibly creating a huge underground spirit cave of fire element. The fire element energy in this place had reached a frightening level, and the underground temperature could be compared to that of an ordinary small star. The lava lake began to explode and expand. Just as a 100 miles in diameter pillar of flame was about to erupt, MOD flicked his sleeve, and the MO city, which had expanded to 100 miles in circumference, flew out, transforming into a dark cloud that pressed down slowly. 8 lofty mountains, which contained an inexhaustible power of fire, and 360 lofty mountains, which contained immense power of stars, simultaneously burst out a large sheet of rainbow light that wrapped around MO city, shielding it as it slowly descended to the ground, forcibly pushing back the fiery column that had burst out from the ground. With a muffled noise, countless black metal chains stretched out from within MO city, their length seemingly endless. They plunged into the surrounding mountains, communicating with the energy core formed within the mountains as one. A long alloy spike, measuring 10,000 miles in length and as thick as a thumb, slowly thrust out from the center of the city, piercing through the lava lake and the thick rock layer, all the way into the deepest underground spirit cave of fire element. A dazzling flame burst out from MO city, while an enormous energy surged through the countless energy passages in the city. The lifeless, pitch-black metal city suddenly came to life, and muffled mechanical noises could be heard coming from everywhere. Numerous huge war machines and various metal puppets, such as dragons, phoenixes, tigers, leopards, and many others, came out from their hiding places, wandering back and forth on the city walls. Everyone breathed a sigh of relief when they saw that MO City had successfully rooted its foundation in the mountains. Great Yin was going to lay a foundation on Pangu continent. While it was easy to provide food and pay, the soldiers needed a large number of armors and weapons. With the strength of the various powers on Pangu continent, Great Yan's soldiers needed a large number of armors and weapons of the grade of heaven immortal items. A safe and stable forging base that could provide an astronomical number of heaven immortal items was indispensable. Fortunately, Great Yan had one more convenient condition than the other 5 dynasties. MOD and MO sect were in Great Yan, and MO sect was in Great Yan. MO sect was famous for forging all kinds of exquisite tools. As long as MOD was given enough materials and time, he could forge any armors, weapons, or war machines. Now, MO City had successfully rooted its foundation here. With the protection of the 2 great formations, it was as stable as Mount Tai, and no longer feared any invasion. Coupled with the support of the enormous natural energy, immortal energy, and fire element energy, it was the most convenient place to forge any kind of immortal item. Not only would this be the armory center of Great Yin in the future, but also the armors and weapons of Wuxia's underhand sect in East Sea County would come from here. Moreover, the land tens of thousands of miles around MO City was surrounded by hundreds of huge mountains. Such a vast area could be used as a training base for Great Yan soldiers. With such a vast area, as long as there was a sufficient supply of food and fodder, it could feed hundreds of millions of soldiers. With the fertile farmland of Anlu County and Yi County, there was no need to worry about the lack of food and fodder. After the formation was laid out, Sun Quang, Su Qin, Han Fei, and Princess Zhongli joined forces to construct countless illusory formations, maze formations, and trap formations within tens of thousands of miles. All the formations were nested into a hole with the 2 great formations in the center. The Formation Eye, which was also the core magical treasure that controlled the operation of the whole formation, was Yandan's prime magical artifact, the Disk of Heavenly Dao Transmigration. And this complex nested formation was named Endless Transmigration by the Emperor and courtiers of Great Yin. Once one stepped into the formation, he or she would be trapped in the transmigration. This was the original meaning of the name. After a long time of work, with the joint efforts of the Emperor and courtiers of Great Yin, the forest was finally taken care of. Just as everyone was clapping and laughing and celebrating their success, Someone from scouting office came with a secret report. In Enlu County and in E County, some Buddhist cultivators were found secretly preaching and recruiting believers. Some secret agents of scouting office followed these Buddhist cultivators to keep an eye on them, but their legs were broken and they were thrown into the street. Chapter 674. Two fat monks, Ming Zhen and Ming Xing, were walking on the streets of Anhe City, staggering with each step. They were carrying a huge wooden fish cast from pure gold in their left hands, and a long wooden fish hammer forged from pure silver in their right hands. Every few steps they took, they would lightly knock on the wooden fish, producing a sonorous and jarring sound. The residents of Anhe City were staring cautiously at these two strange men, who were dressed very differently from the people of Du. Their bald heads and huge, fair bellies surprised the residents even more. No matter if they were of noble birth, high or low status, men or women, old or young, very few people of great You had such a fat body. How could those ordinary people, who came from humble backgrounds, who had to plow the fields and graze the animals, cut firewood and carry water, fish and hunt to feed their families, how could they be fat? Regardless of whether they were men or women, the descendants of influential clans would practice a certain body tempering technique, and it was even rarer to see a fat man. If they had the aptitude to practice magic, they would be chosen by the Directorate of Celestials to learn all kinds of strange magic. The oracles who dealt with ghosts and deities under the heaven would often feed all kinds of evil ghosts and deities with their own blood essence and souls, or use their blood essence as the primer to launch all kinds of magic. With that, those oracles would be as skinny as a stick. How could they look so fair and chubby? If the people of Du came from ordinary clans, they would have a simple and honest air, like the great trees in the mountains, or the boulders in the fields. Those who came from influential clans might be proud and domineering, but they would never have the carefree and leisurely air of these two monks, who seemed to have no worries about anything. The ancient architectural style of Anhe City, as well as the pitch-black square-shaped palaces and pavilions, did not match well with these two monks, who were clad in monk robes made of fine cloth, sandals made of fine grass, silk belts tied around their waists, and wooden fish held in their hands in a splendid manner. They were two unusual people who had intruded into Anhe City. Along the way, the people were sizing them up with great caution. No one talked to them, and no one dared to get close to them. Everyone was staring at them with an indifferent look, as if they were thousands of miles away from them. Ming Zhen and Ming Xing glanced left and right with a smile on their faces. They did not take the cold attitude of the people in Anhe City seriously. Just now, a few spies with low cultivation bases dared to follow them. Although they had also practiced the body tempering technique of Great Yu's military, with their shallow cultivation bases, their arms could only carry a force of about 10,000 kilograms, and they could be considered as experts among mortals. But Ming Zhen and Ming Xing were both gold arhats with accomplished cultivation bases, 10th-tier arhats, and had also practiced the mighty divine ability of the Buddhist League, the evil-subduing dragon, which gave them the power to overturn rivers and seas with a flip of their hands. They were just a few ants, so it was better to break their legs and throw them on the road. The city in front of them was very good. Although the dark buildings made people feel uncomfortable, the people here were not bad. A few years ago, it was said that the disciples of the Buddhist League had infiltrated this area, and had even opened a Taoist rite temple nearby, built a mountain gate, and recruited many believers. But when the war broke out, the immortals of the Fiend League from outer heavenly realms also built their own power here. The conflict between the two sides gave the officials of Du army an advantage. Now the city and its people were under the control of the officials of Du army. It was a pity that the hundreds of years of hard work of the sons of Buddhas had gone to waste. But things were different now. Since the Lord Buddha had made the decision to infiltrate Pangu continent completely, and the 8 Buddhas had sent their disciples into Pangu continent at the same time to preach, there was no need for them to develop so cautiously. They could use their glib tongues to persuade the local people of Enlu County, and make them obediently join the Buddhist League, and become devout believers. Ming Zhen and Ming Xing exchanged a glance and burst into laughter at the same time. The flesh on their fair cheeks twitched a few times, and they shouted the name of Prabhudaratna Buddha at the same time. Moving their lips and tongues, they began to talk about the benefits of joining the Buddhist League in an extravagant manner. Droplets of saliva sprayed out of their mouths and fell to the ground with a faint golden gleam. Immediately, a sheet of golden light burst out of the ground, amidst which white lotus flowers sprayed out. Only bodhisattvas could possess the cultivation base of bodhisattvas. But as Ming Zhen and Ming Xing were chosen to preach on Pangu continent, their eloquence was also top-notch among the many golden arhats who served Prabhudaratna Buddha. Bodhisattvas could emit golden lotuses from their mouths, but they could also emit white lotuses from their mouths. The ground was covered with lotus flowers, the air was filled with fragrance, and all kinds of wonderful scenes had enveloped in He City. The two monks unleashed their willpower, triggering the thoughts of the millions of people in the city. The 7 emotions were stirred at the same time, and the 6 evils were unleashed. Under the guidance of the 2 monks, countless illusions appeared before the eyes of the people of He City. High up in the sky, there were heavenly dragons dancing in the sky, celestial maidens scattering flowers, Bodhi trees and boundless lotus flowers. Many Buddhas and Bodhisattvas sat cross-legged among them, and millions of believers lived in gorgeous houses and palaces, enjoying fine wine, delicious food, beautiful women, and handsome men. Celestial maidens as beautiful as flowers and jade-like celestial maidens, tall and mighty guardians of the Dharma. And whenever those believers needed something, these strange creatures would immediately possess them. Separated by a dense layer of auspicious clouds, under the beautiful heaven were 18 layers of horrible hell. Tongues were pulled out, tendons were pulled out, tendons were pulled out, skin was peeled off, and there were mountains of blades, forests of spears, and even seas of fire and icebergs. All kinds of tortures were described, and all of them made one shudder with fear. If one believed in Prabhudaratna Buddha, he would be taken to the Mahasvara Buddhist kingdom after death, where he would enjoy endless blessings. However, if one did not believe in Prabhudaratna Buddha, it would be a great disrespect to the Buddha, accumulating endless evil karma, and he would definitely fall into hell after death, never to be reincarnated. If one believed in Prabhudaratna Buddha, he would be rewarded with blessings when he was alive, and his family would be safe and sound, without sickness or disaster. If one did not believe in Prabhudaratna Buddha, he would be rewarded with evil karma when he was alive. Men would lose their wives, women would lose their husbands, children would die prematurely, and so on. All kinds of unlucky karma would be involved. 2 monks were standing at the crossroads in the center of He City, flicking their 3-inch tongues and spitting out tiny white lotus flowers. The scene was filled with all sorts of strange phenomena and wonderful sounds, causing the people in He City to feel their hearts and souls ripple uncontrollably. Back then, He City had been under the control of Buddhist cultivators for several hundred years. Although the ascetic cultivators of Buddhist League did not manage to build a solid foundation in the city, the various Buddhist scriptures and meditation techniques they preached still influenced many people. The cultivators of Buddhist League, who controlled He City in those years, were merely nascent soul cultivators. But now, 2 10th-tier golden arhats had appeared in He City. They could be considered as the core members of the Buddhist League, and they had been practicing all kinds of divine abilities in tongues. How could the people in He City resist them? In just less than 8 minutes, many people in He City had dropped to their knees, kowtowing to the 2 monks while chanting the name of Prabhudaratna Buddha. The few streets in He City were packed with people, all of whom were kowtowing to the 2 monks as if they were intoxicated. Their eyes were cloudy, and they looked like a dog that had been smacked in the face with a brick. Ming Zhen and Ming Xing smiled complacently at each other. Their skin and flesh were shivering, and waves of fat were rolling up and down their bodies. Mustering all the Buddhist power they had, they kept waving their tongues and spraying out large amounts of saliva. Specks of golden light wrapped in white lotus flowers filled the entire He City. The 2 monks danced and danced at the crossroads, while specks of Buddhist light flew out of their bodies and sprinkled on the people who were worshipping them. The white hair of the old men turned black, the sick young men were cured, and the healthy ones felt a warm current rolling through their bodies. The energy they had spent on their women last night was suddenly fully restored. The old women straightened their backs, feeling no more soreness in their bodies, while the young women were pleasantly surprised to find that some of the freckles and scars on their bodies had disappeared without a trace. Blessings. This is the blessings of believing in the Buddha. The two monks roared at the top of their lungs. Their saliva had almost dried up. While the two monks were busy preaching the teachings of the Buddhist League, deep and powerful footsteps were heard coming from all directions, sounding like the rumbling of thunder from Chi-Chi. One by one, the people who had been worshipping on the streets were captured by soldiers clad in leather armors and forcibly brought to the shops and houses along the streets. Troops of soldiers armed with strong bows and crossbows and clad in heavy metal armors came marching in from all directions. Their eyes were firm, and their faces were expressionless. Their movements were in perfect unison, as if they were one person. Clearly, they were all elites who had been through hundreds of battles. The two monks, Ming Zhen and Ming Xing, were stunned. Anlu County was just a county in Zhong Province. According to Duyu's military establishment, for a first-grade county with a large population and a developed economy, the military prince would at most have 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers. Anlu County could only have 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers at most. But now, when the two monks scanned the surroundings with their divine will, they found that there were at least 5 soldiers in the entire Anhe city. Among them, 40,000 were forcing the people who were worshipping them into the houses along the streets, while the other 10,000 were controlling the area 2 miles in circumference, with the two monks as the center. These 10,000 heavily armored soldiers were armed with strong crossbows, and the arrows on their bows were emanating faint ripples of energy. The strange and agile ripples of energy made the two monks' faces flicker. They were powerful crossbows made by experts in artifact crafting, and could pose a threat to even heaven immortals. Even though the two monks had the golden bodies of arhats, they dared not to take the volley of 10,000 crossbows head-on. In the past, many immortals, who were conceited about their divine abilities, had attacked the Great Yu army alone. As a result, all the immortals who dared to do so were riddled with sieves by the rain of arrows fired by Duyu's army. Realizing that something was not right, the two monks chanted the name of Buddha together, then stepped onto a cloud and flew away without saying a word. It was just that they suddenly remembered that Anlu County was once controlled by Buddhist cultivators, and that was why they came here to take advantage of the situation and show their faces in front of their fellow disciples. They did not expect that Anhe City would suddenly become like a hedgehog. Just as they were preaching here, an army was sent to besiege them. However, when they had just flown several hundred feet into the air, a 5-colored divine ray came sweeping down from the sky. Princess Zhongli's cold and merciless voice echoed through the entire Anhe City. Kill these 2 bald donkeys. As for the others, their taxes will be increased by 10 times this year. Ming Zhen and Ming Xing's Buddhist energy weakened abruptly, and they fell from the sky like mortals. Followed by a series of popping noise, countless arrows swooshed over, covering the bodies of Ji Hao and Si Wenming with shreds of afterimages. Chapter 675. While Princess Zhonglu was killing 2 preaching monks in Anhe City, Wuxia had taken out Ming Li's head from Bo Yenting's main tent. A small golden sandalwood box was stuffed with all kinds of medicinal powders made from various spices. Ming Li's fat head was stuffed inside the box. He grimaced in pain and died with his eyes wide open, looking extremely fierce. His dead fish-like eyes still reflected a trace of ferocious light. Bo Yenting was struck dumb. Just now, Wuxia volunteered to crack the formation outside, and Wuxia said that he had a 100% chance of doing so, which made Bo Yenting very happy. But after receiving the token, Wuxia did not leave. Instead, he took out a human head. What was he trying to do? Bo Yenting rose to his feet, walked up to Wuxia, and studied Ming Li's head for a while. A Buddhist cultivator? He asked with a frown. Wuxia lowered his head slightly and answered in a deep voice. He is a Buddhist cultivator. His Buddhist name is Ming Li, and he sneaked into the East Sea County of Hai Province with a group of rebels from Myriad Immortal Alliance. The rebels of Myriad Immortal Alliance abducted beautiful girls of certain birthdays in the East Sea County as cultivation vessels, and Ming Li took the opportunity to preach his Buddhist doctrine in the villages and towns where most of the girls were lost. Bo Yenting's face twitched. and a fierce gleam of anger flashed in his eyes. He clenched his teeth and said, "Do they want to repeat what happened in the past? Father is right. These cultivators, whether they are Taoists or monks, have never given up on killing me, do you?" He patted Wuqi on the shoulder and promised that he would immediately report the matter to Bo Zhongfu, the prefecture overseer of Zhong province, in an urgent document, and mobilize a reserve army to guard against the Buddhist cultivators. At the same time, Bo Yenting praised Wuqi for killing Ming Li, and counted it as a great military contribution, and added it to Wuqi's record. Wuqi cupped his fist and bowed to Bo Yenting, then walked out of the tent with the token in his hand. A few heralds sounded the bugle, and passed down the order from Wuqi, who was holding the token. At his command, in addition to the 10,000 soldiers he had brought with him, Bo Yenting had also mobilized 1,000 formidable generals and soldiers to serve under him. The weakest of these soldiers had the cultivation base of 5 stars realm of the first Panga heaven, while the strongest had the cultivation base of 3 stars realm of the second Panga heaven. With these soldiers, he did not have to worry that the immortals of the Immortal Alliance would suddenly rush out of the mountains ahead to disrupt his formation. Apart from these 1,000 elite soldiers, Wuqi also deployed a jade-armored dark turtle flying ship. The dark turtle flying ship was perfectly round from top to bottom, and it was made from the shell of a jade-armored dark turtle, which lived in the Great East Ocean on Pangu continent. They were born with the cultivation base of heaven immortals, and when they reached adulthood, they would have the overall strength of peak-level gold immortals. When they reached adulthood, their bodies were fixed to be 81 miles long and 36 miles wide, and their shells were naturally protected by 64 layers of exquisite runes, giving them an amazing defense. Every 10,000 years, the powerful oracles of Diyu's Directorate of Celestials would hunt and kill a batch of you, using their shells to craft all kinds of magical artifacts. After being refined with medicinal liquid, the Yu had grown to be 8 miles and 150 feet long and 6 miles and 900 feet wide, with 3 layers of specially made alloy armor on the outside. Together with the protection of 64 layers of runes on the shell, there were more than 100 layers of defense on the whole body, which was strong enough to withstand a series of heavy blows from a peak-level gold immortal, and even several attacks from a primordial immortal, who had just stepped into the realm of primordial. The jade-armored dark turtle flying ships were great use strategic weapons. If Bo Zhongfu had not been a close subject of the human emperor, and had a very deep network of connections in the imperial court, he would not have brought 3 of them with him when he took office. As the only beloved son of Bo Zhongfu, Bo Yenting kept 2 jade-armored dark turtle flying ships in the warehouse of his main tent. Bo Zhongfu was afraid that Bo Yenting might be defeated one day, or encounter a dangerous situation like the star attack launched by a gold immortal in Ningbo City. So he had asked Bo Yenting to bring them with him to protect his life. Just now, when Wuqi asked Bo Yenting for a weapon that could guarantee the safety of all his soldiers, Bo Yenting generously gave Wuqi one of the 2 flying ships. This flying boat was large enough to accommodate 10,000 people. Be it in terms of attack or defense, it was top-notch. It was perfect for attacking the great formation outside. After that, he brought the jade-armored dark turtle flying ship to him, then brought out a large number of flaming thunders from the warehouse. These flaming thunders were refined by the oracles of the Directorate of Celestials, by collecting the poisonous flame from the Earth's core. Once they were triggered, everything within 10 miles around them would be reduced to ashes. On top of that, they would erupt with poisonous flame, which was extremely hot and poisonous. Even heaven immortals would rarely be able to fight them head-on. However, it was not easy to refine these flaming thunders, and as the oracles preferred to deal with ghosts and deities, few of them were willing to work hard to refine them for the army. As a result, Bo Yenting only had about 3,000 of them in his warehouse, and Wuqi brought out 1,500 of them at once. In addition to these flaming thunders, Wuqi also brought out dozens of powerful bone talismans that could trigger the eruption of underground fire and turn a plain into a volcano. These bone talismans were pieced together from the strongest and strongest bones of fire elemental demon beasts. Each of them was tens of feet long and wide, and about a foot thick. Those with insufficient cultivation base could not activate such huge bone talismans. But once they were successfully activated, 9 flaming dragons would shoot out of them and sweep in all directions. Wherever the flaming dragons flew past, the ground would immediately collapse and erupt with underground fire, turning hundreds of miles of plain into a boundless volcano. Immediately after that, Wuxia passed down a military order, ordering the oracles who were sacrificing to the 9 giant ghosts and deities in the sky to follow his orders. As soon as anything happened on the east side of the dense fog formation, the 9 fiend gods would immediately focus all their firepower in that direction. After dispersing the mist on the east side, they would immediately focus their firepower on the mountains on the west side of the dense fog formation. They had to reduce those mountains to ashes as quickly as possible, and the formation would be broken. After that, Wuxia assigned tasks to the few military officers. The army brought by Bo Yenting, together with the 7,000 newly armed veterans, had a total of about 80,000 soldiers. All the soldiers had to be prepared. Once the formation was broken, they had to concentrate their forces and attack from the west. At that time, Wuxia would lead the army from the inside and attack from the west. Together, they would definitely be able to defeat the immortals of the Myriad Immortal Alliance. In addition to the 80,000 soldiers, Wuxia also asked Bo Yenting to personally lead 20 to 30 of the strongest generals to guard the eastern sky of the formation. Once they encountered someone breaking out of the formation from the east, they would immediately besiege that person. Wuxia clearly told Bo Yenting and the others that once someone broke out of the formation from the east, it must be the strongest among the immortals of the Myriad Immortal Alliance. Bo Yenting had to be careful. Bo Yenting was helpless against the fog formation in front of him. He did not know what Wuxia's intention was, but he had one good thing about him. He never pretended to know things he did not know. He regarded himself as Wuxia's subordinate, and wholeheartedly mobilized the army according to Wuxia's orders. In less than an hour, all the troops directly under Bo Yenting's command had been mobilized. According to Wuxia's order, it was very likely that a very powerful immortal would show up in the east of the formation. Therefore, Bo Yenting shamelessly moved the other jade-armored dark turtle flying ship dozens of miles east of the formation, then transferred almost all the oracles into the ship, and laid out a ferocious and bloody myriad ghost psychic formation. All he needed to do was wait for someone to rush out from this direction, and then he would kill them all. Wuxia laughed heartily as he boarded the flying ship with his soldiers, and rushed into the formation from the southeast corner at the fastest speed. As soon as they entered the array, a group of about 300 itinerant cultivators appeared in front of them. The strongest of these itinerant cultivators was only at the primordial soul realm, and the weakest had not even formed a gold core. They were just riding a flying sword and patrolling in the air. All of a sudden, they saw a large flying ship, shaped like a tortoise shell, and with a large opening at the front, barging into the great array. Seeing that, all the cultivators there cried out loudly, "That's right!" At the same time, the formation was transforming countless green trees into thunderbolts and bombarding the trapped Great Yu army. While Wuxia was mobilizing the army, more than 2,000 soldiers were killed by the greenwood thunderbolts. The whole formation was rumbling and roaring, and all the natural energy in the formation was sucked into a few hills to the east of the formation, then transformed into green energy by the formation, and turned into thunderbolts to attack the enemy. Regardless of the situation, Wuxia ordered the flying ship to move forward at the fastest speed. The deck of the ship was moved aside, revealing a large number of lookout openings that could allow people to poke half their bodies out. As Wuxia gave the order, the soldiers waved their arms and threw out 1,500 fire thunderbolts with all their strength. The direction in which they were thrown was exactly where the green trees were located in the east of the formation. Deafening booms rang out as a great plume of flame soared into the sky. The black-red earth core poisonous flame rose hundreds of feet high, and the powerful fire thunderbolts blew up an area of 1,000 miles in circumference. The poisonous flame kept melting the rocks, and the magma tumbled and flowed across the ground, making it look like hell. More than half of the greenwood spiritual chi in the formation was set ablaze by the poisonous fire. The azure wood divine thunder that had just formed exploded in mid-air before it even fell. The immortals who were controlling the azure wood divine thunder were caught off guard, and were badly battered by the explosion. Some unlucky ones had their bodies blown to pieces, and even their immortal souls shattered. The formation of 5 elements was said to be infinitely mysterious, but in fact, it could be broken with the simplest way of promoting and restraining the 5 elements. Wuxia saw the changes in the formation, so he rushed in from the weakest point of the formation and bombarded it with fire thunderbolts, immediately stopping the formation. Then, dozens of bone talismans were activated at the same time. Hundreds of fire dragons soared into the sky and rushed toward the mountains in the east. Amidst the dragon roars, the few mountains that were filled with chaotic energies suddenly collapsed. Flames hundreds of miles high rose from the ground, and lava and other things rose high into the sky. The terrifying power of the flames burned half of the sky red. If a grandmaster who was proficient in formations could reverse the formation and transfer the water power from the north to the east, the fire could still be extinguished and the formation could continue to operate. But the people who controlled the formation only had an ordinary mastery of formations, so they were thrown into confusion and failed to adjust the formation. Outside the formation, the 9 huge fireballs in the sky laughed wildly when they saw the red light shooting out from the east of the formation. The 9 fireballs fell whistling down, and the heavenly fire and earthly fire intertwined, burning the eastern foundation of the formation until there was no hope of saving it. Wuxia let out a wild laugh. Controlling the jade armor dark turtle flying ship, and controlling the several hundred fire dragons that shot out from the bone talismans, he went straight towards the door of gold element in the west while withstanding the wild bombardment from several hundred cultivators. Using the earthly fire to restrain the metal gate in the west immediately collapsed. You're tuning in to the Lime's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.